I have a question. So I understand the process of karma.
Okay.
Thank you for your explication.
Okay.
What I don't understand is, so let's say that someone has, okay, let's say someone's born into poverty because of their karma.
Yeah.
And it follows then that they asked for it and kind of deserved it, as you explained. How does that square with working on behalf of the welfare of others? Like, what's the motivation?
I understand.
Is it an intervention? Like,
I understand. No.
I don't get it.
Okay. I think that question is a very common question we have, framed in different ways. But I feel that that question is based upon the assumption that when we have compassion, it has to be for innocent victims. So as soon as we hear that a person creates the cause for their own suffering, we seem to deduce, well, then they don't deserve compassion. Whereas, when a person gets cancer, it's because they've smoked, right? So it's their own mistake. But no one says, oh, well, you deserve it. I'm not going to help you heal, do they? We just naturally try to give them the medicine, don't we? So meaning, what I'm saying again is, the real question to ask is, look at the assumption we have that suffering is got no cause in relation to the person. And as soon as we hear it does, we assume, oh, well, they deserve it, so why help them? So what's the reason to help a person who's got cancer? We know the reason. It's their own stupidity for smoking. So I'm not being rude, but the Buddha says everything everything that's called suffering is the fruit of a negative action. And actually, when you understand first for yourself, that's why you're suffering, and you stop becoming a victim and you start becoming accountable, and that means you start having compassion for yourself. You realize, what a fool, I didn't realize that my own actions caused me suffering. That causes you to have compassion for yourself and stop doing the same things again. So then now you're ready to see suffering, and your heart breaks for everybody, including the harmers, because you realize they don't realize that they're causing their own suffering in the future. And you have compassion for the victims because they think they're innocent, but in fact they're not. And so the understanding of karma informs your wish to change and your compassion for others. In fact, it's the reason you have compassion for others, because we're all in the same boat, all suffering because of our own past actions and past stupidity. It's actually the reason you want to help people. Can you hear that?
Yes. Yeah, I do. That's very helpful.
Okay. Then?
Well, so like when you say that people choose their parents, what about
not choose. Okay. Choose is literally meaning volition, and they're the parents, I'll go to them. No, your seeds you plant due to your past karma drive you. You're on autopilot, basically. And most of the things we do now, we're on autopilot. We don't, you don't think that you choose to have a car accident. You don't choose for someone to punch you in the nose. The way they say it is you created the cause to put that seed in your mind, which you don't know is there, and then it happens. So it's the same with your mother. You create the cause due to past history with that person to run to that mother. So technically you don't choose. Only when you're a highly realized being and you're really in control of this process, you will literally choose. You'll have such power and such clarity that you can choose exactly where you want to get born or not. Do you understand?
Yes.
We're driven by our past choices, basically. In just the same way now, it sounds a bit sort of fatalistic to us, but if you think the main cause of your ability to play the right notes on the piano is that you've practiced it really for a long time. So almost you could argue, you don't sit there when you're really good at piano, you don't sit there and choose to put your finger on C or F. You've so practiced it that it'll go there automatically. Well, that's all the good stuff too. Why good things happen is because you practice virtue, and why bad things happen is because you practice negative. And so we just kind of stumble into them now because we've sown the seeds and now the results come. But we can learn to choose to be in control of the process so that we pull out all the negative ones and we actually will not get any more suffering in the future. That's the idea. You understand my point?
Yeah, that's very helpful.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Yep. Hang on, Alan. Just a second, Alan. Wait. More people. You had a couple of questions already. So someone else down here. This gentleman down. Oh, okay, go. Yes, please, sweetheart.
Thank you.
What's your name? May I know your name? I forget.
Nanawea. Nanawea.
Nanawea. Okay,
Yes,
Nanawea.
ma'am.
May I have your question?
Okay, I have a question. 3 questions, actually.
Yes.
First one is, would you discuss the meaning of the word root guru?
Yes.
Second question is, do we have a karmic connection to our guru, and can the guru absolve our karma?
I understand. Root guru is a term, I think they use that in Tibetan. I'm not sure if it comes from the Indian, but it's just meaning the one who's like your heart teacher, the one you feel closest to, the one that you feel is the one that touches your heart most, that you think of most, that guides you most, and that's your choice. Secondly, the absolutely strong karmic connection has to be, has to be. You wouldn't meet them otherwise, and you wouldn't feel that way otherwise. no question. Very strong karmic connection, strong history with that person. And thirdly, nobody can absolve you in that sense that we would use that word of any negative karma. But you know, given that, I mean, a very excellent doctor who can read your health very well can give you very good medicine. So that because the teacher is skillful and sees your mind, they can give you medicine and advice that you can practice that will help you get rid of your rubbish karma.
Well, maybe I misspoke.
Yes.
Some Indian gurus say they will take on their students'
Okay,
karma.
I understand. Well, I hear the same in the Buddhist one. They talk about the great yogis. For example, there's one of Lama Zopa Rinpoche's teachers who passed away on the day of a particular long life puja for His Holiness in a particular year, the Dalai Lama. And the way the Lama Zopa interprets it, and I've heard this in the past about the great yogis, he consciously chose to die on that day to sort of to take upon himself any negative obstacles. It's sort of like they run in front of the car and take the accident, in a sense. You could say it's a bit like that. I've heard that. How it actually works, I don't know, but I've heard that. Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. 1, 2, 3. Okay. Coming. No, here first. And 1, 2, 3 down there. Yes.
Hello. Can somebody share the karma?
What do you mean by that?
Like, for example, why do good things happen
To whom?
to me? I mean,
Why do bad?
no, seriously. I'm very serious about it.
So bad.
2.5 years back, I was supposed to go into a prison for all the bad things what I did in my life. But I met this girl who changed my life, who's my wife now.
So that's okay. The way what that is, you had some negative seeds from the past, from having done things that caused you to continue to do them in this life, which was then the cooperative cause for you to be sent to prison. Okay, or you could have been. But then on the other hand, you have lots of virtuous karmic seeds as well in your garden, and fortunately at that time, they ripened that caused you to meet a person who helped you, which helped you change. Of course. We have masses of negative and positive seeds in our gardens.
Okay, because
Did you hear me? Did you hear the answer?
Yeah, I got the answer. But I was also comparing these. I mean, I'm asking this in most of the forums where I meet such gurus like you. So in one of the forums back in India, when I asked the same question, they said it's because of the astrology, the astrological power of the person who comes into your life.
Okay, I mean, that could also be another way of describing how come that person, but the simplest question is how come you met that person at this time that helped you turn your life around? That's the fruit of, it's like you get cancer, which is the result of negative karma, but you meet a doctor who can heal you. It's the same answer. I mean, we can also talk about the astrology, because the Buddhists do that, but the fundamental one is why, the fundamental principle, that's why I like to use the idea of a garden. If you look at your garden, if you think of your life as your garden, then whatever arises in your life, good or bad, first cause, a past action of yours. That's the fundamental principle. And once we get that down, it's not confusing. I mean, it's a way of saying it. Whatever good arises in your life is the fruit of your past virtue. Whatever bad arises in your life is the fruit of your past non-virtue. It's as basic as that, as fundamental as that. Are we communicating?
Yeah.
Yeah?
Thank you.
Okay. Someone else, please. 3 people down here. 4 people. 3 people, yeah. Yes.
Hi.
5 people.
I was just
Three
wondering
pages
if
down
you
the
could say something between the connection between the brain and the mind.
Can I say something?
Yeah, I mean, is the
I've
brain
done
like...
about neuroscience, but I know that these marvelous talks the last 30 years between the Buddhists and the Westerners have come up with lots of interesting ways to see. But I mean, still, the way I would answer the question would be, if I take the view that your mind is not physical, then obviously we've got a body, and in just the same way that your Tibetan doctor will feel your pulses, which are physical, but a different model of physical, you understand, the winds are physical, she can read the winds, which can tell her something about your mind. So in just the same way, I would suggest that if you look at the brain, we can see indicators of what's going on in the mind. The point being, the brain isn't the mind, but it obviously plays a role, and it has a relationship with the mind. That's the Buddhist way of answering it. Do you see my point?
Yes.
Okay. Yes. Yes.
Hello.
Hello.
When you were speaking about
complete action, you had mentioned that motivation is a particularly strong
The
component.
motivation
of
in all the actions we do is the factor that determines whether that action we do will sow a negative or positive seed in the mind. Yes.
Okay. I believe you also mentioned that the most simple definition of karma is relating to intention, correct?
The way that you could say that until there's the mind involved in something that your body and speech does, you can't say there's karma. Body and speech don't create karma on their own. You could stand on a mouse while you're sitting there cooking the dinner for your child full of compassion, and you have no idea the mouse is there. Well, the first part of it was there, the mouse is there, that's object. Number two, completely missing, your mind is not engaged. It doesn't see, therefore there can't be intention, therefore can't be recognition, therefore can't be motivation. That's missing completely. Third, your foot stands on the mouth. Fourth, the mouth dies. They're all there, but there's no mind involved, so it can't be karma. It's impossible. Karma means done by the mind first, and then the body and speech carry out its wishes, basically. The body and speech are just the servants of our mind, is the way of saying it.
So then how is karma related to intention?
It's the presence of your mind being involved in the action.
Okay, it's just the presence.
Can you see the difference between you intending to kill a mouse, having the wish to harm it, and then your foot killing a mouse and you having no thought of it? Is that not surely not different?
Right, yeah.
Well, there can't be karma if there's no mind involved. There can't be, logically.
Okay.
What's puzzling about that?
No, I just, if that's the case, then maybe I may have just misheard you earlier saying that the most simple definition of karma.
No, the simple meaning of the word karma is intention. The one way of saying it. Can you hear that? What do you hear when you hear that?
I hear that I'm confused by that, because if motivation is really this driving force.
The motivation is what determines the intention. You know, you can decide to kill a mouse. The thought to kill a mouse is, I will kill the mouse. But if you unpack that, you're going to see there's, as we would say it, a reason behind the thought to kill a mouse. In other words, it's not set in stone that your wish to kill a mouse is because you want to harm it. We know people kill mice out of, Buddha would say, misguided compassion, thinking it'll stop its suffering. So that's a really good example. You could have a mouse in your kitchen. You could see the mouse is suffering. The object is there. Number one, object, a living mouse. Number two, intention, the broad heading. Number 2A, recognition. That is the mouse. 2B, intention. I will kill that mouse. 2C, your motivation. Compassion, because you think killing it will stop its suffering. You're full of compassion for this being. You only want to help it, but you happen to think killing it will help. But the motivation is what transforms that whole action for you into leaving a virtuous seed in your mind, even though if the mouse goes from the frying pan into the fire, which is more than likely, meaning when you do kill it, it will go to the lower realms again. So you didn't actually help the mouse at all. So of course in our culture we don't factor future lives into it. And it's the same with your grandma. You really mean well when you kill your grandma. It doesn't mean you create negative karma, because you really meant well, but meaning well is not enough. You've got to have wisdom. Because maybe your grandma was freaking out when she died. You thought that killing her would stop her suffering. You really want to help grandma. You're in tears of compassion. But the reality is, because you're not clairvoyant, you don't realize that because when she died she was freaking out, which triggered negative karma, which threw her into a lower realm rebirth. You put her from the frying pan into the fire. Thanks a lot, grandma. Back off, please. So that's the point about compassion. Even for you, you don't create negative karma. But you didn't help your grandma. We're not used to thinking this in the West. So this is again intention. Without that, you couldn't have compassion. So the point is, it is the motivation that does determine the character of the action, and this especially is the Mahayana interpretation.
Okay, yep, that makes
You
more
see,
sense.
it's obvious. If you look at, there's me looking violent and full of loathing and disgust for that mouse and to smash it to smithereens, and there's you in tears of compassion about to kill the mouse. It's obvious that what's going on in your mind is informing what you're doing. So whatever goes on in your mind is the karma you create. It's not some abstract external big thing. It's not it's what's in your mind that determines the karma you create. It's kind of obvious. And look at my mind. It's obvious I want to harm the mouse. It's heavy negative karma for my part. Because I not only kill it, I want to harm it.
So if you're killing the mouse from this negative place and my killing the mouse from this compassionate
very
place,
different karmic results.
It's very different karmic.
That's the point.
Yeah.
Which doesn't mean you're walking around trying to kill people with compassion. No, back off, don't, and leave them alone, please. But it's making the point that when we start to unpack the component of what goes on when we, quote, do actions. There's very many things going on here. It's just to point out how powerful, even of misguided motivation. You know, I might have a really big headache and you've got a pill and you really want to help me, but you just can't remember whether it's cyanide or aspirin. Well, I'd like you to leave me with my headache, please. Because you don't know whether that, you've got to know, in other words, the Buddhist one is you've got to know the consequences of your action before you leap in meaning well. As Lama Zopa says, meaning well is not enough. You've got to have wisdom. So, but the point I'm making, even from your point of view, genuinely wanting to help somebody, even though you've got no wisdom, still doesn't mean you create very negative karma when you end up causing a terrible result. And look at most of our lives, we intervene all the time, butting our noses in where they don't belong, meaning well, but we don't help at all because we've got no wisdom. Do you see my point?
Yeah. So then why not, when mentioning the word karma, why not go straight to motivation rather than to intention?
Because it's not. It's because intention is the first one.
Okay,
the thought,
that's
I
the
will do
first
it.
one. Okay.
Then you unpack it.
Okay.
And that's driving every millisecond. As Lama Zopa says, everything exists on the tip of the wish, the thought, I will, I want, even aspiration. May I, I want to walk out the door. It's the piece, that's what will make my legs pick me up and walk out. But beneath it is an intention because I'm going to go out to kill you. So it's the one that starts the process. Intention starts the process. The way they talk about how there's 5 always present mental factors. They talk about in the Buddhist model of the mind. There's different states of mind. They call them mental factors. And there's 5 that are always present in everything any sentient being does. The first is intention. Starts the ball rolling. Okay. Then we look deeper and look at the motivation behind it.
Thank you.
Then there's attention. Then you pay attention. Then you have these other ones, different ones, recognition, feeling, and contact, different things. It's highly subtle, but this process is what's happening all the time, which is why we have to learn to understand this process. Like in the microscope onto our own mind, on the cognitive process, to really unpack it and understand what goes on, and then to be in control of it. Because much of the time now we're on autopilot. 99% of what we do is just instinct. Do you understand? So in fact, I might be chatting to you, being very friendly, and I feel a tickle, and I go like this, but almost without blinking. Everything was there. There was an object, a living mosquito. The second one, intention. I recognize it's a mosquito right in that millisecond. Number 2, intention, to kill the mosquito. Number 3, aversion. How dare it take my blood? 3, I did the action. 4, I recognize it's dead. Rejoice. All in a millisecond with hardly out a blink. Most of our actions are even more instinctive than that, but they've got all those components in them. But that's why we have to be in charge of the process, conscious, and so to really change the whole process. And crucially, in the Mahayana, to change the motivation. That can help change everything. It's huge. You see what I'm saying?
Thank you.
Okay. Somebody else back there. Back there were several hands before. They now changed their minds.
Hi, thank you.
Hello.
Hi, I have 2 questions. One is, what motivated you to put on the robes and make that decision? And also, I just proposed to my girlfriend, and I'm curious about commitments and vows and any advice.
What was the first part about your girlfriend?
Going into
What did you say?
marriage.
What was the first bit you said about your girlfriend?
The first question is why you put on
About
robes.
the part, yeah, I get that.
And then the second one is I just proposed, and
Oh, you
I'm
did?
just
Well done,
looking
okay.
for.
Did she accept?
She did.
Well, I'm very happy.
Yeah. And it was like 4 people knew. Now it's a lot
Okay.
more.
I will answer your first part.
But it was through a lot of deliberation, and so any advice on what that
sweetheart.
going into vows like of that
Oh,
nature,
darling.
I'd appreciate.
Okay, I'll
Thank
do
you.
my best based on my experience. So the first one, I mean, there's not a simple answer. Let's just take the Buddhist view, and we have to deduce some very strong karmic imprints, karmic connection with monasticism. I mean, the first time I was born to a Catholic family, and all I know is from the first, like I mentioned, the first moment I went to Mass, I came home completely announcing. It was like written on stone. It was like Moses had announced it to me, on the 10 Commandments. I said, I'm going to be a priest. It's my job. I recognize it straight away. So we can deduce from this, I must have had a karmic imprint. of having been a monastic of some kind. It's like people when they first hear music or first see gymnasts or go to, I know what I'm going to be for the rest of my life. It's strong karmic connection with that, you know. So that has to be the first one there. We take the Buddhist view. And then even though I was really naughty and very uncontrolled and bad behaviour, and still trying to calm down, somehow my mind went in that direction. I mean, I was brought up in a Catholic family. Every one of my other 6 siblings have never thought of, I mean, one of them did a little bit, talked about God, and would do the sign of the cross every now and again, you know. But some of my other sisters, they've never thought any of these thoughts I've ever thought, which shows to me really you come programmed with your own stuff, you know. I would talk about God, Our Lady, I read all the saints, and then when I was about 13, I'd completely fallen in love with Saint Therese of Lisieux. I don't know if you're a Catholic. She's a little nun who became a Carmelite nun when she was 14, like when they sacrificed their lives for God. See, it's a bit curious because when I was 13, my mother got upset with me because I was walking down Murrumbina Road. It was when we were at the time of Elvis, and I was a widgie. Have you heard of widgies and bodgies? I think you didn't have it in America. There was an Australian version of, like in Greece, the hair, it's sort of like the Elvis time. The girls were called widgies and the boys were called bodgies. And the boys had their hair like this and the girls who had short hair were all done up like this, and they had cheap earrings. So I'd gone to Woolies and stolen some pink luminous earrings. I stole my mother's high heels, had a full skirt. We had a little kind of studded belt, and then a chain around our neck with a heart on it, with Elvis on it, and pink lipstick, which I took from Woolies. And I was walking down Murrumbina Road trying to seduce Tony Kincotta, the 16-year-old greengrocer's son. So my mother found out and was freaked out. I mean, I was 13, but at the same time I was loving God, so I don't know how these two got together, but they did. And then I remember my mother was telling me off, and I must have been even shorter than I am now, because I remember her looking down at me, you know, and she said, "You have the audacity." And I used to read books, and I thought, audacity, how do you spell that, you know? I was trying to visualise it, O-R-D. I'd never heard of the word audacity before. So anyway, she sent me to boarding school to live at the same school where I'd been going anyway. And then I was in heaven. I found my life. I studied for the first time. I went to Mass 7 mornings a week. I memorised all the Mass in Latin. It was like monastic karma ripening, you know. But then when I was 15, I heard, my mother was a classical musician and she brought me up to be a singer, and she wouldn't let us listen to rock and roll or anything. But I remember hearing I saw a 7-inch LP of this person called Billie Holiday. And I said to myself, I wonder who he is, you know. But I bought it. And then I bought another record called Miles Davis, Sketches of Spain. So that blew my mind, and then my religious aspirations then became social. So then I was 19, I decided it was time to say, hello God, goodbye boys. And then it was like drugs and more jazz, not rock and roll, drugs and sex and that one. And then I was 23 and went to London, and then it was hippie, and more drugs and more jazz, and then communist, and then black politics, and then feminist, looking for the reasons why the world was suffering. So basically I went the political way, you know, 100%. And then by the time I was 30, I'd exhausted all options. And then I did martial arts, and looking for another, and I found I liked that very much. But then I met Lama Yeshe and Lama Zopa, and then they told me I should look at my own mind. So that was a brand new idea to me, that my mind was the cause of the problems. I thought it was the straight people, the rich people, the white people, and the male people. But no, apparently it was my mind, so I'm still looking on that. So I never wanted to get married, I never wanted babies, I never wanted security. That was a very strange idea. So when I finally met these lamas, I'd given up my 18 Marlboros a day, I'd given up marijuana, I'd given up sex, I'd given up alcohol. So there was this next step. Oh, here they are. This is the kind of nun I want to be. Thank goodness. Finally I found it, you know. So that was why I took the robes. Does it make sense, roughly speaking? Okay. And so far so good. But I mean, putting it another way, the main one, as I mentioned yesterday, I kind of mean it not as a joke, but it sounds arrogant. I wanted freedom. That's a very strong thing that drives me. I don't want to be squashed by things. I don't want people to tell me what to do, and that's very proud, I suppose, but there's going to be an advantage to it. So I didn't want to be encumbered by other people and their choices and things. And it might sound very selfish, but I wanted also truth. I wanted a way to understand the world. That's always what's driven me since I was a tiny girl. So using Buddha's view at the moment. And to be free. I mean, I don't know. Yeah. I mean, I can't imagine me living in a monastery. I mean, I do. But I think, anyway, whatever. Okay. Does that answer your question roughly? Yeah. Okay. So as for advice, I mean, if you want to live with this person, a human being, amazing. So then remember, we've got negative states of mind, which have caused the problem, and then we've got the positive, which have caused the good things. So learn to distinguish them. Learn to recognize the root one day to day, which is this craving, need to be loved, to be trapped, to be, the person to do what you want every day, to make you feel good, to praise you, to love you, to look at you with dazzled eyes, for everything to go your way. That's attachment. So now there's a big opportunity to start giving up wanting what attachment wants every second and actually thinking what another person wants occasionally. So well done, I congratulate you, and good luck. It's a great practice. Okay, and then when babies start, if you want that as well, that's when really practice starts. There's a wonderful story I read in the Financial Times yesterday. This woman in London, in England, runs an organisation. It's very fascinating, that tries to help crazy, mostly girls and boys, who are out of control, who are into sex, to start to see the consequences of having sex as having a baby. So they have these dolls, specially programmed dolls that cry every 5 minutes, that need to be subdued, that need to have their diapers changed every 10 minutes. They're all programmed, and somehow they're programmed so that only that person, they can't just give it to their mother to take care of. It's an experiment they do for several weeks. And most of the time, these children, these kids, 11, 12, 13, 14, completely freak out and never want to have a baby again in their whole life. So, because they realise the hard work of dealing with a human being, especially when you're 12 and 13, it's like a nightmare. They want to destroy it. They've often chucked the baby in the bin, this doll, because they're so exhausted. So then the Buddha's view is distinguish between fantasies and the fiction and facts. Delusions are fictions, and they create fictions, and they're all the fantasies, and the virtues are facts. So learn to distinguish, then your life will be good. Does that make sense? You don't look like you're noticing what I said.
I mean, sometimes I think it's a bit challenging to decipher fact.
That is honey, this is the major job. This is the big job that the Buddha would say when we really begin. This is why, using the Buddhist model, we've got these three categories. Let's talk about this more now, okay? We've got these three categories of states of mind. The ones that are called negative, which are delusional, neurotic, fear-based, and marvelously are the ones that Buddha says we can get rid of. That's the point of the whole job. Number two, we have the ones that are called virtue, which are kindness, love, compassion. These are our saving grace. These are the ones that make us human, and these are the ones that can help us transform ourselves. And these are the ones we have to learn to access. And then not to mention that, but the third category, they call them neutral. It doesn't mean because they're not important, but they're like the mechanics of the mind. There's millions of these, and these are crucial states of mind without which you'd be a mad person. Like mindfulness, which is not forgetting what you're doing, concentration, vigilance. There's many of these. Attention, intention. They're all these neither virtuous nor non-virtuous in their character. So whether you're a bad person predominantly or a good person, these all function. So, a sniper needs really good focus. Well, so does a meditator. So using these neutral ones to help you develop wisdom and virtue, that's their job. That's how we have to train our minds. So the trouble is, though, in day-to-day life, this mind of ours, from the second we wake up until the second we go to sleep, is just this great big soup of mixed emotions. And we only notice these. They're all underpinned by being thoughts, which is what we really can't see at the beginning. But then we just notice at the emotional level. And because we're programmed with these very instinctively, we only notice when the anger is violently erupting. We only notice when the affection is really strong, or the compassion causes tears to come. We don't notice the thoughts, the conceptual stories that underpin both the virtuous and the non-virtuous ones. And that's what we have to learn. It's the Buddhist view, the Buddhist very specific model. Learn first theoretically to distinguish between a negative and a positive and a neutral, and they're radically different, but it's a very fine point, first theoretically. Then you've got to learn concentration meditation, and then you learn to go into your own mind and begin to actually identify these thousands of thoughts, which are like really hard to notice until we really begin to pay attention and to know accurately how to define them. I mean, I use the analogy of a great big mass of overgrown green stuff out there, and you're not a botanist. It's impossible, isn't it, to distinguish a weed from a herb from a flower, because you don't know the difference. You've never looked, and you don't know botany. So the first step is you can't just look. And this is one of the biggest problems, I think, when we talk about mindfulness meditation. We think just by closing our eyes and focusing, somehow wisdom comes from this. No. You can have this same mindfulness, and you can look at that massive overgrown green stuff, and you can have such clear vision of it, you can even replicate it in a drawing. But listen, if you can't distinguish the herb from the flower, from the weed. I don't care how much mindfulness you have. You've got to imbue that mindfulness with intelligence, which is knowing what botany is. So that when you plus mindful, you go, oh, there's a weed, there's a herb, which you would not have recognized because you didn't know the labels before. The same with our mind. It's not enough just to be mindful and to notice what's happening. You've got to know how to label what's going on in your mind, and that's what Buddha's botany is all about, Buddhist model of the mind. And it's so precise, so distinct. Yeah.
And when do we start to work with, let go of labels and
Why do you want to let
concepts?
go of a label? That sounds like nihilism to me. So explain your point.
Isn't that maybe getting...
Explain your point.
From what I understand is that the concepts are, I guess, getting into emptiness dash
I understand your point.
appearance.
Yep.
Like, do we like,
Go on.
letting go, like versus investigating further and traveling into the concepts to get to know them more intimately.
Yes.
And versus like, well, what if I let go, and what if I, okay, let me like stay on the object of the breath, or
Yes.
less than the breath,
Yes.
or
Yes.
and keep slicing it out and
Yes.
cutting away. No.
Okay,
let this-
no, okay. Okay. We can do concentration meditation, this amazing technique the Hindus came up with. We can achieve what they refer to as samadhi, which they even call liberation, but which Buddha says is just the beginning. You know, it does, in fact, single point of concentration does enable you to access a subtle level of your mind that necessarily means you've ceased conceptuality. You have, and the state of mind is blissful. You're single-pointed, focused, you are blissful. There's no question. But, Buddha says, this is only, what you've just done is access like the microscope of your mind, and you, because you've trained not following the thoughts, which is the method you need to use to get focus, and you've developed this effortless single-pointedness, which is a stunning state of mind that itself brings incredible blissful byproducts. Amazing. But it's not, it's until you've used that laser-like capacity of focus to go to the second mode of meditation, which is called special insight, or insight in general, and then the method you use with this laser-like mind you need to unpack and unravel these endless concepts that are there until you've uprooted them. So merely ceasing them by concentrating is just temporary. You've got to actually get them to at the root and uproot them. And the only way you can do that, and which you've got concentration, you can do it quite quickly, you would learn to, because even though your mind's focused, the thoughts, you can conjure them, and they're all there, and you've got this clarity of this laser-like mind that's able to, combined with wisdom, can identify the elaborate conceptual stories that these delusions are talking, and you can hear clearly how they're nonsense, and you can use virtue and wisdom to argue with them, to unpack them, and all the way down finally to arguing with the deepest delusion, which is the one that clings to the self-existent me, which we'll talk about, and finally prove that they're all liars. That's when you realize emptiness. That's when you cut the root. That's when you can be non-conceptual, honey.
Thank you.
You communicated? Okay, good. I think someone back there, that gentleman. Then we'll talk about, I think we'll jump straight to the deepest delusion and see how we can unpack that one. Yes.
Hello. I had two questions. The first was, how does a being rise from the lower realms?
To the, yes.
Since they don't have the intelligence.
That's right.
Yeah.
Exactly. That's where, okay, in general, the way to say it, I suppose, is there you are with countless, I like to sort of use the analogy, it's ridiculous, but it's my analogy. We're lugging around with us bank vaults of trillions and trillions of karmic seeds. So we've got all these bank vaults of negative and positive, fully complete karmic seeds, which would ripen as rebirths. We've got a bunch of bank vaults of negative and positive tendencies, karmic seeds, that produce your personality. Bank vaults of experiences similar to the cause karmic seeds, which are the ones that cause you to meet this person or that person, to harm you or hate you or help you. And you've got also the environmental karmic seeds, which is the way the physical world impacts upon you. So whether you're a lion or a human, all these karmic seeds are playing out. So the crucial one is the fully ripened result one, which is the type of one for the rebirth. So the fact is that we've got these trillions of karmic seeds. This is why Lama Zopa, in this book that is out now, will publish next year from Wisdom, but out as an ebook available from fpmt.org/death. The book is there. It's all about how to help people at the time of death. And the point he really emphasizes, which is the classic Buddhist position, that because death is such a fearful state for most of us, because we live in denial of it, we've never thought about it, therefore we can't stand the thought of it. Therefore, at the time of death, just naturally, very strong fear rises. So the point about that is this, that because we've got these bucket loads, trillions of karmic seeds, right, not just from this life, but from other lives, and we're going through this very terrifying experience of letting go of this life, especially if you've never prepared for it, then as you start the process of death, which does start at a certain point, and the death process is described in great detail, which comes from the Vajrayana, it's in the book, then before you stop breathing while this process is actually happening, you're going towards death. Very powerful grasping, strong attachment is triggered. So if you're dying peacefully, which is the greatest gift you can offer anybody, as Lama Zopa says, and the key thing in this book is, the greatest gift you can offer anyone is to help them die well. Because that's when the next life karmic seed is determined. It's the most precious time. You want to help anybody in this life? Help them at the time of death, baby. Because the key thing is to help them two things: to die with peace, be peaceful and virtuous. So Buddhist psychological model says that, and we can see it ourselves, when the mind is virtuous, that means when the mind is loving, kind, compassionate, it's also peaceful. So the crucial thing, whether it's your cat or your mother, you help them be peaceful. You also help them stay conscious. Just zonking them out on drugs will not help, because they're going to have their subtle mind like in a dream state, and it can be like a nightmare. We all know when you're sick, nightmares, that you're hallucinating. So you've got to be as conscious as possible. So there's your pussycat, okay, who's an animal, but it's or your dog, let's say, and it's very attached to you. You're a human, and you're helping it at the time of death. You have mantras playing of the Buddhas. It's peaceful. It's in an environment. It's trusting you. You're making it feel safe. Right? And so this grasping very strongly arises at the time of death, before they stop breathing. And that can help, could help trigger, because they're dying virtuously and peacefully, that grasping can help trigger, it is the cause for triggering the seed that will be the one that will throw you into the next life. So there they are, hearing the Buddha's words, being peaceful with you around them, kind of clinging for you. This can trigger a human seed. It can help you, if their mind is peaceful, that can attract a virtuous karmic seed to be triggered, which will be the one that will throw them into a human life. They can't do anything themselves, they're useless.
Yeah.
But that's how we can help them. And the other thing about this, Lama Zopa is big into this, but if we take the Buddhist view about karma, which it says that every millisecond, that what any sentient being sees, hears, especially those two senses are very powerful, also touches, tastes, smells, or thinks about, leaves imprints, leaves photos, if you like. One Lama said it's like you're taking pictures and storing them in the mind. So therefore, your animal, your grandma, your senile, or whatever you is, if they're dying peacefully, you helping them, being peaceful. And if they're a Christian, you talk about God, how God loves them, you talk about their good qualities, so they become virtuous and peaceful. This is the best way to help trigger a virtuous karmic seed, because psychologically speaking, there's this natural organic relationship between a virtuous thought and peaceful. Are we communicating?
Yes. I guess that leads to a second question about that. Yes. So the last moments before your death are almost like more important than the rest of your life.
You could say that. You could say that. And of course, obviously, the way you live your life determines the seeds that you have access to at the time of your death. It's not a miracle, and suddenly, you've spent your life being mean and ugly and jumping on the wrong people and killing and lying and stealing. It's unlikely that death will be too peaceful. And yes, unless, of course, there's also the virtuous seeds there, and somehow, marvelously, you're able to change your mind before you die, because we've all got billions of virtuous and non-virtuous seeds. So clearly the time to prepare for death is right now, but you've got to really practice to stay peaceful and virtuous and to know how to die well. And that's something we often don't think of. And this book of Lama Zopa's is so amazing, really explaining the process, how to help other people, which means, of course, how to help yourself, Because the Buddhist view says it's the karma we create that's the one that determines the life. And the way we die especially plays a massive role. Yep.
Thank you.
Someone else. So I think we should go a bit more into the delusions and then look into the root delusion, how it's the biggest troublemaker of all, the one that causes all the others. So effectively, as Lama Zopa points out in this book, but this is certainly Buddha's teachings, effectively in day-to-day life, we could say that the delusion that is the main problem is the one called attachment, which for us in our materialist world is such a funny, weird idea because we don't even use the word like Buddha uses it. I mean, we use the word attachment to even be synonymous with being close to somebody. We use it in a virtuous way, and we're allowed to do that. We can define words in any way we like, you know. But the Buddha's definition is really clear. So one of the two key factors about all these states of mind under the heading called negative or delusional or non-virtuous, often they're synonymous, or neurotic, I like to use that term, Buddha I'm sure would have liked that, or afflictions, you know, these terms they use. They have this very specific characteristics of one of being just deeply disturbing, and that we can prove pretty quickly. Check the last time you were angry, depressed, jealous, you know. As I like to say, you don't go, oh God, I was so jealous yesterday, Robina, it was just so good. No, I don't think so. It is a nightmare. We know that. That's evident. They're disturbing. But the other one, which is really the one we need to understand by studying Buddhist model of the mind, which many Buddhists don't do, that's okay, but we need to, if you want to be Buddhist, is to this point that we're making, that underneath the emotional component, which is the one that we notice, anger, jealousy, we feel it. It's like it's so intense and it's virtually physical, isn't it? The ache in the heart, you can't even find where that pain is existing, but it's the realest pain we'll ever feel when the person has left you, when you've got the jealousy, the grief, the loss. We know it's just unbelievably powerful feeling, as we call it. But it's a shock to us to hear that feeling is underpinned by an elaborate conceptual story that Buddha says is a complete stinking lousy lie. This is really hard to see. And the reason the feeling is so strong is only because we've practiced thinking those elaborate conceptual stories for so long, such that when I was a tiny girl, the moment my attachment didn't get what it wanted, violent anger erupted. So my mummy didn't teach me that. She didn't need to, because I had myself programmed to perfection. So you don't notice all the thoughts that are coming up so instantaneously. All you notice is the explosion of feeling. I mean, you recognize what I'm saying, right? So it's really hard to kind of reverse the process in your mind and go down into the highly complex conceptual elaboration, which is basically at the level of an assumption, that Buddha says when we start to question that assumption, it's not accurate. In other words, another way of putting this is all the stuff that arises in our mind, whether it's virtuous or non-virtuous, forget the other lot. That basically what he's saying is they all are underpinned by conceptual stories. They're all concepts, which means thoughts. This is a big shock to us, you know, because we notice feelings. So this is where we've got to do so much unpacking, and it's quite a subtle process and takes a lot of, you know, discipline, concentration, clarity to use this model to be able to see our minds in this way. And so basically, you know, just take a simple example. What's your name down there? Who proposed? What's your name? Chris. Yeah, Chris. Okay, let's say Chris. Let's say he proposed to me. Let's say he's my boyfriend, okay? Pity help Chris. He's really in for the practice. Okay, let's say Chris is my boyfriend. So let's say Chris looks at this other girl. And so jealousy rises in my mind, which it would have done, painfully, like a nightmare, no question. So what you try to do when you be your own therapist, using this model that Buddha talks, this is one approach. You know, you don't, you know, you sort of say to yourself, well, it's either true, Chris might have looked at the other girl, or he might not have. You've got to first establish that's a possibility. It might be right, or it might not be right, that in fact he did look at another girl. But what you say to yourself is, well, Rita, that's not the issue. Let's look at what you're experiencing here and what's it called. Of course, it's so hard to be so rational when you're full of emotion, you're tears and exploding and want to jump on him, you know, and scream and shout, and you looked at that other girl. So this is part of the problem too. So what's happening is this. This emotion of jealousy is underpinned. It is actually a story that says that he is mine and he has no right to look at another girl because he's committed to me. So on a relative level, that could be true, but that's what ego is saying. So that's one of the functions of very powerful possessiveness, which is one of the many functions of what's called attachment. So attachment, first of all, the fundamental one that's underpinning the jealousy is the one even of anger, because you get mad at him. How dare he do that? You know, how dare he do that? But that's anger. Anger is the response because my attachment's not getting what it wants. And what's my attachment? My attachment, the fundamental voice of attachment, is that I must get what I want every millisecond. And because he's committed to me, that attachment adds the story that he is mine. It's called possessiveness. Possessiveness is one of the functions of attachment. So that as long as I take that as an absolute truth, that he is mine, that I own him, that I possess him, and I have the view that my attachment has the view that he must do what I want every second, so naturally jealousy will arise. So Buddha says all these are the misconceptions. He doesn't belong to me. Attachment is a complete obsessive, neurotic, needy state of mind that is so unstable because there's no sense of any contentment in my mind, and an utter belief that he, which is mine, must do what I want to make me happy. It's like it's riddled with misconceptions, all these stories, the jealousy, the anger that comes down to attachment, which itself is underpinned by the root delusion of this very powerful, inherent, real, independent I in the first place. So you unpack each of those emotions, you try to describe the story that it's telling you. It's like these, I like to use the analogy of all these crazy roommates in my head, all these different thoughts. My head is full, our minds are full of millions of thoughts. We all know that, running like 1,000 a second. They even say that in modern psychology. So every one of them is a concept, but they're so quick and so speedy and so mixed together that we can't tell one bit from another. And they're so fast, and they trigger emotions. We only notice them when the emotion is triggered. So there's an enormous amount of unpacking to do. But not unpacking in the way we do in the West. Well, what caused me to always get jealous? What did my mummy do to me? What did my daddy to me? Why do I always get jealous? Meaning what caused it way back then? No, that's not helpful, not for the Buddha. It could be helpful, but the best one is to go directly into the state of mind itself. Call it for what it is. He might or might looked at somebody. That's not the issue here. That's his problem. And this is why it's so hard. You've got to recognize this is jealousy, and it is my jealousy. It's my freaking out. It's mine. He didn't implant jealousy in me. We believe he did. We believe his action of always looking at other girls caused me to be jealous. But the Buddha would say it's merely the catalyst. That's all. It's a secondary cause. It's a secondary cause. The jealousy is mine. This is so intense, So the owning of it even is already so painful, so hard, because I want to blame him. I want to say, you looked at that girl, it's your fault. This is the irony of ego. It's a total victim. But to owning the jealousy is mine, then to begin to hear what it's saying and how it's based on this anger, which is the assumption that my I must get what it wants every time. And then you start to unpack and listen to the story of the attachment, which is frantic neediness to get what I want every millisecond, otherwise mental breakdown. And then you can even go further and start to analyze the very root delusion itself, which is the assumption of the I that gets attached, that gets jealous and gets angry. Are we communicating? It's a totally internal process. Totally internal, based upon understanding that your mind is not physical, understanding these are your own imprints. You can even inform it with the view of karma. That will help because you know that's yours. But it's really hard because the emotion is so intense, and the assumptions behind jealousy, anger, attachment, ego, grasping are what we take as the truth. We don't ever question. And then we believe these stories. So Chris might go, no, Robina, darling, I didn't look at another girl. But this is the tragedy. You'd think I'd go, oh, darling, didn't you? What a relief. No way. You did look at another girl, I will say. So the irony of ego is we are addicted to believing the bad stories. We are addicted to believing the delusions. This is the tragedy. Sometimes we're so addicted to negative thoughts. Even someone else says positive things, we just can't hear it. Our mind runs like a magnet to the but this, but no good, but I'm hopeless, but it's horrible, but I'm useless, but this. It's really the tragedy of ego. The irony of ego is its self-pity, is grotesque self-centeredness. And don't be mean to yourself for this. Just recognize this. Our hearts should break for ourselves, And we're addicted to these. Not, you know, and this is why the Buddhist view for me, at least positing the possibility that I didn't come into this life as a brand open, as a blank slate, and then my mother and father and the Catholic nuns proceeded to shape me, which is what we think. No, you came fully programmed with your own stuff. I find that quite tasty. It's mine, you know. My anger, my jealousy, my love, my compassion, my kindness. There's an ownership with that. Not blame, not guilt, not beating yourself up, not punishment, not reward, ownership. Then you can start to hear your mind and hear the stories these misconceptions tell, you know, because they're all lies, Buddha says. And of course, the deepest lie of all is the assumption of an I. And this is really a tricky one. This is a minefield for us. And we hear it so wrongly. So in the Buddhist literature, you know, it's got its own kind of genre, a special literature unique to the one, they call it the wisdom teachings. But really, the more, you know, we tend to study the mind on the one hand and then the wisdom on the other, but actually they're all linked. And if we can start to understand the Buddhist model that says that all these negative states, these neurotic emotions, these disturbing emotions, these delusions, I like to say the hierarchy of them. And the root one is this one, the misconception of I, which gives rise to attachment to get what the fantasy I wants, which gives rise to aversion and panic attack when the I doesn't get what it wants, which gives rise to jealousy and all the other rubbish, you know. Low self-esteem, depression, and all the rest. They're kind of all branches of this root delusion. So when we start to understand how all the delusions have got the same characteristic as the ignorance, the root delusion, they're all liars, they're all distortions, they're all embellishments, or as Lama Yeshe says, all these delusions decorate on top of what is already there. Layers upon layers of characteristics that just aren't there. Then we really can get our head around the way the mind works for the Buddha. So on the other hand, the virtuous states of mind, love, empathy, compassion, forgiveness, joy, kindness, you know, all these things which we all know about, it's kind of a fascinating way to put it. If the neurotic ones are rooted in being misconceptions, then we could argue that the virtuous ones are to some extent rooted in being accurate. So one way of putting all this, all the thoughts, all the feelings, emotions, thoughts in our mind come down to being thoughts, like I'm saying. Come down to being underpinned by thoughts, by conceptions. So love is a conception. Love is defined as, it's a virtue under the virtuous heading, and it's the thought, it's defined as a delight in someone's happiness. If you say, I love you, I love Chris, that means I want Chris to be happy. It's necessarily altruistic. It's necessarily connected to another. So Buddha would say that's relative reality, because interdependence is one way of describing how things exist on a relative, ordinary level. Everything exists interdependently. So we can see, if Chris and I are having a really nice time and being friendly to each other, you know, and I'm saying hello to him and he says hello to me, and I empathise with his headache and he empathises with my constipation or whatever. You understand? You can say, oh, look at Robina and Chris, they're experiencing some love and compassion, which is technically true. Love and compassion are mostly prevalent. And you can all see it looks very pleasing, doesn't it? There's harmony there, is there not? And it's peaceful. And you can argue there's no vivid feeling of a separate I. There's sort of a feeling of we. There's a sense of connectedness, isn't there? We know that. Look when there's a whole group of people who are harmonious. Even the way the physical environment is. When everything is working nicely, the elements all behave nicely. Well, the Buddha would say that's the fruit of virtuous karma. Even the elements behave nicely due to past virtue, because our mind affects the elements. So the point is this. We can argue then that those virtues which are connected to, causing us to be connected to each other, they are rooted in some sense of truth, because truth is, reality is that everything exists interdependently. So when we're in touch with virtues, we're relatively speaking in touch with reality. Whereas look at when suddenly he says the wrong word. Suddenly we start to fight. Suddenly attachment arises, gets upset, anger arises, and what happens? Everything's all mangled and horrible, isn't it? Suddenly the thought of we is cut in half. There's a miserable poor old Chris over there looking daggers at me. There's poor self-pity me looking at daggers at Chris. There's no sense of interdependence. There's no harmony, and there's just miserable feelings. And that's because delusions have now manifested. We understand this every day. So Buddha says it's all related to reality. Reality is that everything exists interdependently. And there's many ways he describes this very precisely, and we need to do that to understand how things exist ultimately, which of course is emptiness. So the point the Buddha is making is, as we get, the delusions are rooted in lies, so therefore they're rooted in misconceptions, and they're rooted in ego grasping, which is the root delusion. So as we lessen them, what we're doing is lessening the lies and growing the truths, growing being in sync with truth, which is meaning therefore more harmonious, more peaceful. Because peaceful and truth go together, harmonious and truth go together, disharmony and jagged and ugly and lies go together. It's kind of very natural for the Buddha. There's a very natural way that things are. No one makes it like this. So, it's not enough just to be a nice person. It's not enough just to grow love and compassion and lessen attachment and anger. We've got to uproot the root delusion, which is the cause of all of it in the first place. So you could say, as long as there's still an assumption in my mind of a self-existent, real, solid, independent me who loves a real, solid, independent Chris, we might be virtuous, but we're still buying into the deepest delusion of all of separate, independent Chris and separate, independent Robina. And as long as we've got that ego grasping, the root delusion, we'll never, ever, ever get out of suffering, Buddha says. So it's a question of kind of degree. First we got rid of the gross delusions, which are what cause the terrible suffering of the lower realms and the day-to-day nightmare suffering of an ordinary human birth. And then we can start to grow virtue, which only then brings us more good births. But that's not enough. We've got to cut the root of all of them, so we don't need to get reborn into samsara any longer. And then of course that's wisdom, realizing emptiness. And then of course we have to add compassion to the mix, bodhicitta, so we become a Buddha. We keep coming back out of choice to be of benefit to sentient beings. So let's look at this root delusion and what is truth. If it's seeing a lie, then what is true? And keep remembering, this truth that Buddha's suggesting is not truth that we think when we think of religion that's made up by somebody that we're supposed to believe. That's how we think. No, we know that with science. You know, I always think of the guy who created numbers, this amazing genius Arab way back when, who sort of chucked out that ridiculous Roman system of letters and come up from 0 to 9. I mean, look at the universe since him, you know. Absolutely stunning. So you can't say he created numbers. He simply took the logic of the universe and labelled it numbers. So, you know, maths and science and engineering and architecture, all of which have come from numbers, are actually natural. But he just articulated it. That's what we mean by science. Well, that's what Buddha means too. He says karma is a natural law, not made up by anybody. That's superficial. No, that's a natural law, he says, that he has articulated, observed and articulated. He says it's a natural law like gravity or botany or numbers. This is a crucial point to understand. You don't have to believe him. It's up to you to check up. As Dan said, check up the scientists, see who's right finally, which is a tough one. So, okay, what Buddha's saying is that, the way to present these wisdom teachings, one marvellous way that Lama Tsongkhapa, our lineage Lama, oh no, that's Buddha, yeah, that's Lama Tsongkhapa, there he is, the way he, our 14th century lineage Lama, like our patron saint, you know, Tsongkhapa from the 14th century, how he presents, and it's from Buddhist, of course it's all Buddhist teachings, is in the emptiness and the wisdom teachings in the context of the two truths. Conventional truth and what they call or truths and ultimate truths. So basically, when you study Buddhist philosophy, you learn the various terms, the synonyms that are referring to that which exists. And this is a massive point. Buddha wants us to get clear, relatively even first, what exists and what doesn't. Because he says right now, the delusions in our mind are cognizing phenomena that just don't exist. So for example, attachment is a liar in the mind that over-exaggerates the deliciousness of a cake, such that the cake appears to the mind to be delicious from its own side, such that when I eat it, I'll get happy. That's the cake that attachment sees. And all Buddha's saying is that's not the cake that exists. As Lama Zopa says, that delusion, in this case, attachment, decorates on top of what does exist characteristics that just don't exist there. So it's in that sense that Buddha says we are cognizing phenomena that don't exist. He doesn't mean we see a carrot cake when in fact it's a chocolate cake. No, we're seeing a carrot cake. We're seeing a chocolate cake, but delusion is exaggerating its characteristics. If you think chocolate cake is revolting because you vomit every time you eat it, well then I guarantee it appears to you as disgusting. But you think disgusting cake is on that plate there. No, there's no disgusting cake. There is a cake, but not the cake that you think, because your aversion is lying to you. This is what Buddha says we're doing every millisecond. All these delusions are projecting their own stories that feed us back to us. Oh, she is divine, he is ugly, that is good, it is bad, that's beautiful, that isn't. We're living in lies, Buddha says, that are stories projected by our delusions onto the person, onto the event, that causes it, as Lama Zopa says, to sort of appear back to you in a way that isn't true. This is Buddha's deal, you know. It's kind of interesting. He says everything is made by the mind. And he's not kidding, all the way to the end. He's not kidding. So, okay, when we first get clear the different terms in Buddhist philosophy for that which exists, there are several synonyms. Object of knowledge, existent, phenomenon, established base. There are 4 of them. They're all synonyms for that which exists. And the universe is made up of all of them. And there are trillions of them. And we're talking conventional truth here. So the Buddha's saying, if he's saying that our delusions cause the phenomena of the universe to appear wrongly to us, and that's what keeps us in samsara, and that's what causes us suffering, then we first have to get clear, establish conventionally what exists. That means we have to name it, and that's called a cup. So, you know, who says? I'll say to Mummy, being a smarty pants. Well, darling, that's the English word that we have developed over the centuries for that thing there, that flat-bottom clay container. That's the first part of its definition. It tells you its conventional characteristics. A cup is a flat-bottom clay container. You can see that, but you have to learn the words, don't you? This is establishing something conventionally. You establish clay, container, you know. Then you have to know the second part of the definition, which tells you its job. And this is massive. This is massively important. Its job or its function. Well, Mummy, what does it do? Well, darling, it holds my tea. But then you don't even, then you go, well, who says? You should say, who says? Don't just believe your mother. So then what do? We get the tea and we pour. And we will see that in fact it fits its definition. It does in fact hold my tea. So what we've just done is establish the existence of a cup. It's a conventional truth. And guess who made it? Our mind. We've established it. But even more than that, as His Holiness says, that's not quite enough yet to really establish that we can all tick off and agree and shake hands that this is a cup. We have to make sure there's no other conventional a valid cognition in somebody else's mind in ordinary life that would contradict that. So once we've established that, we can all sign the contract, tick the boxes and all shake hands, and we now can proceed to discuss a cup, because we've agreed upon it. And the Buddha would say everything in the universe is established like that. First, conventionally. You have to agree. That's what conventional reality means. By agreement. By agreement. And we can see this. Everything. You know, I remember that, you know, those HSBC bank ads, I don't know if they have them much in America, have a series of posters. And there's one of them is a pair of shoes outside by the front door. And in the West, that's no. If you go into a party and take your shoes off, you're very rude in the West. But if you go into a party and leave your shoes on in the East, you're considered very rude. So you establish the fact that in the West, keeping your shoes on is good. You establish the fact that keeping your shoes off in the East is good. So this is establishing a conventional truth. Already it's implying emptiness. So we establish what is this, what is that. And then we can proceed to look into how it exists, to see the mistakes our delusions make. In particular, the root delusion called ego grasping, known colloquially, or as technically ignorance, or marigpa, unawareness. And this ignorance is the root of all the others. And that's why when it is uprooted, that's what the realization of emptiness is, which we'll talk. So this root delusion is the cause of all the problems. Effectively in day-to-day life, attachment, which is the main voice of ego grasping, is the root of all the problems. So, okay. So we establish there's a cup. Then let's look at this. There's another phenomenon here, and that's called a chair. So we define it, we label it, we all agree. And there's another phenomenon here called a person. So we can see this room is full of phenomena called persons. And each of us is an example of that type of phenomena. We're a person, or we're an I, or we're a self. These words are synonymous. So conventionally, we fit the definition of a self. We are a self. Conventionally, we are a self. Conventionally, self is the correct label for this person, this phenomenon sitting in the chair. Okay, so then, as we know, Buddhist teachings in particular talk about the way this ignorance misconceives our own self. This is where this word is used in many ways in Buddhism. So this is where Buddha diverged first of all from the Hindus. He came to various conclusions in his own mind, from his own observation, about the very nature of what a self actually is. So he argued with the Hindu position that there is a something in there that is core in here among the body and the mind, a third component called an atma or atman or self, that's got a very specific characteristic of being not changing from moment to moment, meaning not impermanent, and not caused, other characteristics as well. So that's where Buddha diverged. He, from his own meditation, from his own experience, cognized that there isn't such a phenomenon. He's not just being argumentative. So this Atma is equivalent to what the Christians would call a soul. And ontologically speaking, the way it exists is the way that God or a creator is said to exist. And that means as something permanent, unchanging, not caused by anything, and necessarily above everything else. And what Buddha has said is, what his own findings is that such a phenomenon can't exist. He says it can't. There can't be such a phenomenon. And anyway, he's saying in terms of a soul or a self, this Atma or a spirit, he would say it's an unnecessary embellishment. We don't need such a phenomenon. It's enough to have a mind and a body, because the Buddha would say they are the components of a person. There's no added component called this special little permanent self that he says that position holds. So he diverged from there. And then in the various Buddhist schools over the centuries, there are various positions about this, what does exist and what doesn't. So the view that we're describing here, which comes from our Lama Tsongkhapa, which comes from our tradition, is the view of the school of thought called the consequentialist middle way. There's different schools of thought. So basically, let's just keep it simple. There are different views that Buddha argues with. And so the first one is one we just said, and forget that one. But the second one is really tasty. So this position, Buddha says, at the moment, this ignorance in our mind, this marigpa, this ego grasping that we've had since beginningless time, that underpins all of our future life, all of our lives, all of our suffering, even all of our happiness, totally 1,000,000% believes in, again, similar to the first view, a little part. Okay, so Buddha would say the second part is crucial. This second way of describing dependent arising. The dependent arising is the term that's used to refer to how things exist conventionally. So here we have the phenomenon called a person. And we can see that a person is made up of many parts. A cup is made up of many parts. A chair is made of many parts. One of Buddha's fundamental findings is that everything that exists is made of many parts. But this view here, he says, that ego has, ego grasping has, which he says is a misconception, which this ignorance in our mind believes in, that this ignorance believes totally that there is a part in here somewhere, among all the parts of the body and among all the parts of the mind, but sort of like another part, that, as one of my friends, Tripton Pende, says, that's walking hand in hand with all the other bits and pieces, this part that we call I, or self. He says we are made of parts, and the parts are called all the millions of thoughts, all the millions of feelings, and all the millions of atoms of the body, and the knees, and the joints, and the pee-pee, and the caca, and the eyeball, and the eyelashes. We can list, if we had to list, all the parts, there'd be countless millions of parts of the body and parts of the mind. Buddha says a person, the term I, the term self, is made up of millions of parts. If you like, we can narrow these down to just two: the mind and the body. The mind, or the thoughts, and the body. They're the two parts Buddha says we have. But this delusion in our mind believes totally in another part that's like the boss part, like the landlord, like the boss, the ones that runs the show, that's called I. He says, such a part doesn't exist. And so what we have to do is use logic to argue with ego grasping's position that there is such a part. Put it that way. And we totally believe there is. All our language expresses it. Our feelings express it. We believed in this since countless eons, Buddha says. And this is not the subtlest understanding of emptiness yet, the one we have to get to counteract this. This is a gross mistake. This ignorance makes even a subtler mistake, which we'll discuss it after tea or something. What's going on? Another 15 minutes. Are we communicating so far? So what Buddha's saying is this ignorance, this ego grasping, the gross mistake it makes is totally believing that there is a piece of me that's walking with the other pieces of me, and this piece is like the boss me, like the mini me, and it's called I. Look at our language. I have a hand. I did not do that. You harmed me, So we have to use logic, Buddha says, to argue with it, because just saying it doesn't exist is not helpful, because we totally, utterly, powerfully, primordially believe in it. So to have to unpack it slowly. We have to stop arguing with this misconception. But it's really hard. Because you see, the thing is, if Buddha says this I doesn't exist, we get totally confused because we don't even think there's a separate part called I. We just say I and never question it. We just say I and believe it. So we have to even first establish what we think the I is before we begin to do what Buddha says we have to do, which is negate its existence. So then, okay, now, full stop, new chapter. We'll go back there now, but another way of looking now. Let's look at the terminology. So then what Buddha's basically saying is that I doesn't exist. And what we have to recognize, he says, and this is ultimate truth, and this is the words, we have to cognize the emptiness of that I. So emptiness here simply means not. But it's a noun, isn't it? Emptiness. Now you look at our world, we talk like this, we'll go, uh-oh, my cup's empty. Or you look in your bank account, oh, my bank account's empty. Or you look in the room, you'll go, oh, the room's empty. We know exactly what that means, don't we? First of all, we establish there is a cup that does exist that lacks something that doesn't exist there. Is it not? When we say the cup is empty, we know it means there is no tea in the cup, because that's our language. So that means we do say there is a cup that does exist, that lacks something that doesn't exist there. Can you get that point? It's true, isn't it? The tea doesn't exist there. So if you look at your bank account, my bank account is empty. We know a bank account should have dollars in it, so we can see there are no dollars, so we use the phrase, my bank account's empty. So we know that phrase. It's very interesting. So when we hear Buddha says that everything is empty, we get completely thrown. And we should ask, well, empty of what? That's the first question. Empty of what? This is shorthand, you know. Empty of what? Well, the Buddha's saying that these parts, this body and mind, are empty of an inherent I. Just put it this way simply, okay? So we don't even know what an inherent I is. Like if you say your cup's empty of water and you don't know what water is, you've got to first establish what water is before you can know it's empty, don't you? You've got to know what it means. That's why the first thing we have to recognize is, what does Buddha mean by an I that doesn't exist? An I that's independent of the parts. We have to clearly understand what that would be if it did exist. Then we can proceed to discover whether or not it does exist. So if you say to me, can you please go and find my uha in the lounge room? And you're nervous to ask about what an uha is. Well, I think you'd probably search for 47 years, wouldn't you? Because your mistake is you haven't established what an uha is and what an uha looks like, isn't it? But once you know what it looks like, it won't take you too long to discover whether or not it's in the lounge room. Isn't that true? So our problem here is we leap to thinking, oh, I better realise there's no I. And emptiness, 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 no I, no I. Well, you go for an eternity because you don't even know what the I is that you think is existing in the first place. Are we communicating? So we have to establish what Buddha is saying that we think the I is. And that's the part that's difficult for us. So one of the ways to talk about that, at this particular level we just described, this grosser mistake that ignorance makes. It believes there's an I, hear the words, that's independently existing from the other parts. Hear the word independent. It's a really important point that's used in all the different levels of emptiness. It's got a very specific meaning in every case, a really powerful meaning. So in general, there's no relationship between a cup and a table, is there? They don't depend on each other. If you have a cup and you can have a table and the one doesn't fall apart if the other isn't there. Would you agree with that? So you could say my cup has a table, and there's, but you can separate them. So from a simple level, you can say the cup and the table are independent. Would you agree? They don't depend upon each other to exist, do they? Do you agree with that? Okay. Well, that Buddha says that's how we think the I is. It's a separate piece that is sort of independent of the other parts. Can you hear my point? Now, this is where we get confused. Lama Zopa says, one argument is, if there is an I that's in there that's independent of your nose, independent of your eye, independent of your knee, independent of your anger, independent of your jealousy, can you hear what I'm saying? A separate I that's like a boss that owns everything. If there is that I, he says, oh, that's great. The I can go to work every day and the body and the mind can stay at home having fun. But that sounds ridiculous to us because we get confused. Because as soon as we say I, the best we can do is, where's your I? Well, it's sort of all here, It's sort of I'm I. It's the best we can say. Or if we get really offended, insulted, someone says you nearly did that, or a car nearly runs over you, you get this feeling of I rising with fear and panic, isn't it? We call it instinct for survival in the West. Well, Buddha wouldn't like that phrase. That's the rising of this ego grasping that believes in this independent I that's running the show, that's just been offended or nearly run over by a truck. But we don't think of it like this. We don't articulate it this way. And that's why we have to start to analyze what an I would be like if it were independent of the parts, independent of the mind, independent of the body. And that means very simply, like the cup and the table, you could separate them and there'd be no difference. The eye could rush off and do this and that, the body and mind would still be fine. And it's obviously not like that, because we kind of vaguely know, well, it can't be like that, because this is me, and we know, well, my knee is hurting. I feel very much pain when my knee is hurting, don't I? And I feel very offended when you say my nose is ugly. So we feel that there is an I there, but somehow it doesn't feel independent, does it? It does feel dependent. So that's true. It is dependent. But it's the key is we think it's independent. The way we deposit it theoretically, but it can't be possible, he says. So I think we should have a break first. Then we'll go on about it after. Like Lama Zopa says, this is the crucial point. What delusions do, all of them, is decorate, here's the point, decorate on top of what is there. So there is always something there. That's the crucial piece about dependent arising and emptiness. We tend to think as soon as we hear emptiness, we think, oh, there's nothing. The commonest misconception is there's nothing. But there can't be nothing. Conventional truth is there is something. And what delusions do is decorate on top of that. Things that don't exist there. So it's more nuanced than just making things up. Like instead of being one cup, there's two. Not like that. So, excuse me. So we've got to understand, if he's saying that we're believing in an I that doesn't exist, we have to know what that I would be like if it did exist, because that's the one we're clinging to. It's not a question of going, oh, there's no I, emptiness, emptiness, hoping for some vision to come, you know. And they say, there's one way of talking about realizing emptiness, one way of meditating on emptiness. It's called there's a four-stage analysis. And the first of the 4 stages is where they say you have to clearly identify the object to be negated, which is to say you've got to identify what you think the I is. In other words, once you've identified what U-R is, you can then easily find whether it's there or not. But you first have to discover what is an U-R. So we've got to first be clear about what an independent I would be like if it existed. This is the crucial part. And they say once you've got that, it's easy to realize emptiness. And that's the one that'll take us the longest time. To identify the object to be negated. So here we're talking about a grosser way of understanding emptiness. This is not even the subtlest one yet. This business of the landlord, you know. Like a part, it's a part, a piece of us, a piece that isn't the body, that isn't the mind, but somehow kind of like them, but running everything. And all Buddha's saying is, if there were an I like that, it would be an I that is independent of the body and independent of the mind, and very simply, just like the cup and the table, you could remove them from each other without disturbing the peace. That's what independent means in this sense. But we can see very clearly it's not possible. For example, you know, if we think the I is separate, then when we say, I nearly fell off the mountain, it's plainly absurd. Because your mind didn't nearly fall off the mountain. The little piece called I, if it were independent, it could fall off the mountain and leave the body and the speech behind, the body and the mind behind on the mountain, saying, bye, self. If it were independent. So absurdly, it's not. We can see it's absurd. But that's the way we think the I is if it were independent. And it clearly is not. So, you know, it's stupid when you say, I nearly fell off the mountain. It's stupid. Your body nearly fell off the mountain. Be precise, please. I am angry. No, your mind possesses anger. There is anger in your mind. So the trouble is, we have conventional language, you know, which says, I am this, I am that, my name's Robina, I'm sitting here, I'm fat, I'm ugly, I'm old, whatever, you know. I'm depressed, I'm jealous, I've got a pain in my knee. These are conventional ways of talking. We don't need to change that. But what the Buddha's saying is, we over-exaggerate, we over-embellish all of that and end up believing in an independent I that has an independent knee ache and an independent I that has independent anger. We don't think we think that. That's why we have to understand what he means by that it would be independent of the other parts. So a really nice exercise I like to do, you kind of, instead of trying to show to look for the I. We go the opposite, and we do an exercise like you'll see. Okay, so I'll use this example. What's the name of this action? What's the name of this action? What's going on down there? Sounds like a coal man. What's he going? What am I doing here? What's going on here? What's the name? So who's holding a cup here? Okay, Robina's holding a cup. Would you agree that's the correct, valid statement for this action? Yeah? So now let's think I've lost my memory and you have to educate me. Like you open up your IKEA box and it gives you instructions of all the bits and pieces you have to put together, don't you? Let's do an IKEA job on this. So you have to write down for me to give me instructions every piece that's involved in the action of holding the cup. So we first of all would have to look at all the bits and pieces of the body that all are playing their role. Would you agree with this? By the time you start writing down, you'd have many, many, many parts of your body. Would you agree with this? That are all working beautifully to have the experience of Robina's hand holding a cup. You have the thumb does this, and then the pinky here, and the index finger, the joints, the muscles, the bones, and the wrist, and here, and the muscle there, and the joint there, and there's something. You'd have thousands of bits and pieces. Would you agree if you had to give me complete instructions of everything I had to do to replicate this action? Yeah? You agree? You agree? Okay. And it'd be the shoulder. It'd be so many things. You'd have a list of hundreds of pieces. Do you agree? Okay, now we can see the next part that's playing a role in this action is obviously the mind, isn't it? I mean, a dead body can't hold a cup. Do you understand? So we've got to now look at the parts of my mind that are working with the body to have the experience called I am holding a cup. Do you agree with this? So you've got to list all the parts of the mind, and there's many, and these are mainly the parts that aren't the virtues and the non-virtues. These are the mechanical parts. These are the parts that are called the neutral. There's got to be intention. I will hold the cup. Then I've got to pay attention. There's got to be attention. There's got to be mindfulness, which is not forgetting what I'm doing. There's got to be concentration. There's got to be vigilance. There's many parts of the mind. Are we communicating here? Which are the components of a person that all work beautifully together to have the simple experience of Robina holding a cup. Are we in agreement here? Now, have you noticed that among all the hundreds of parts of the body and among all the hundreds of parts of the mind, we haven't mentioned a part called I yet. So what part would the I do that isn't already being done by the body and the mind, please? Are we communicating here? So, Buddha would say the body and the mind do beautifully together. You don't need this added component of a boss. You don't need the added component of an independent I that we think is like the creator, like God, or like the one running the show. That's an embellishment. That's a fantasy. We've made it up. So this exercise here, so would you please tell me what role an I would have that the body and the mind aren't doing? What bit's missing here? Any suggestions?
Desire to hold the cup up.
But that's called intention. It's a part of the mind. Intention. It's a part of the mind. It's called intention. Your point is good. Everyone says the same thing, but you've got to listen to it. It's called intention. It's a part of the mind. It's called intention. That's it. No more, no less. But the simple point is, we think there has to be an I that has an intention. Don't we? Pardon?
The heart desiring?
What's the heart mean?
Like it's actually the mind desiring?
No, there's a part. Your mind has many parts. And one part that does the job of intending is called intention. Then there's paying attention. Then there's concentration and mindfulness. All these parts of your mind work hand in hand together to make sure that it's doing its job to help the hand hold the cup. They're parts of the mind. Are you with me? Can you see? Yes. Yeah.
When somebody has a stroke, and that part of the brain is not functioning.
It is the brain, but the Buddha would say it's part of the mind that's not functioning, which is not the brain. That's okay, the brain isn't functioning, yes.
So if the mind still is there, why the person is not capable to hold
Because gross consciousness the gross consciousness, in this model we call gross, subtle and very subtle consciousness, the model they use in Vajrayana, gross consciousness is the way we function with our senses in dependence upon a brain and a working nervous system. So one piece of those missing, the mind can't function. That's all. That's all. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yes.
Yeah. What else, people? Can you get the point we're talking here? All Buddha's saying is we don't need a piece called I. But it's kind of scary because it seems like the one that runs the universe, the one that feels the pain, the one that makes a decision, the one that gets insulted, the one that feels lonely, the one that feels hungry. It's absolutely central player in our universe. And it's a bit shocking to hear that that thought I is not referring to anything. No wonder we're mad. So the Buddha's saying that we'll get to the subtlest level now. This is one that's very kind of the only level that Lama Zopa ever talks at. They're basically saying here now, not just the I, but everything in the universe that does exist. Buddha's saying everything in the universe. If a hell realm exists, then that. A peanut, an atom, a Buddha, an evil person, Hitler, Mother Teresa, your fingernail, whatever you posit as existing. You give a name to it, you define it, you make sure it fulfills its function, we then sign off that it is a conventional truth. That phenomenon, Buddha says, the conventional phenomena, from this, as they say, in that phenomenon, among its parts, because everything's made of parts, the Buddha would say, so we say the cup, we establish a cup, label the cup, define the cup, tick the box, there is the cup, conventionally it does function. The Buddha would say, from this subtlest point of view, that from the side of the cup, here, in the parts, in the handle, in the clay, in the paint, from the side of the bits and pieces of the cup, the Buddha would say, there's not one atom of anything, not 1/millionth of an atom of anything that makes it a cup. Another way they say that that cup from its own side, there's nothing there. Another way to say it is that from the side of the cup, there's not an atom of meaning from the side of the cup. That meaning, cup, is coming from the mind. That everything exists like that. A Buddha is completely lacking in even the subtlest atom of anything from the side of the Buddha, from the parts of a Buddha, which is body and mind. There's not one atom of anything there. There's not one atom of anything there that gives it the meaning Buddha. That meaning Buddha comes from the mind. That's what they call merely labeled. And this is what Tsongkhapa says. Because what we hear when we hear that, we go completely demented and we chuck the baby out with the bathwater and we go, oh, well, there's no Buddha, there's no I, there's no this, there's no that. Wrong. Because what Tsongkhapa says in one of his texts, hymns of experience, it's something like he says, there's not one, saying what I'm saying, from the side of the object, there is not one atom of anything there that makes it that. But listen to this, but nevertheless, it does function. And that's the part that's tricky. In other words, it can never be nothing. Can never be nothing. When it says there's not any atom of anything from the side of the cup that makes it a cup. The meaning is given by the mind. The meaning comes from the mind. It does function as a cup. It is a cup. It does function as a Buddha. A Buddha is enlightened, does exist, does pervade the universe, does see everything, does help sentient beings, does manifest in billions of forms throughout billions of universes for billions of eons. That is a Buddha, but not from the side of the Buddha. Not one atom of that exists. It exists insofar as the mind gives it that, and it functions as that. And that's the part we have to put together. These are the seeming utter contradictions that we have to put together. So the two truths, so tasty, you know. In the Heart Sutra, Lord Buddha's teaching in the Heart Sutra, it says, as we know, the first, all the Heart Sutra, not all, but the Heart Sutra, what it is a presentation of all the different categories of phenomena of this universe we occupy, listing the categories, and Lord Buddha is saying that we have to continuously and constantly and whatever, analyze how, everything is empty of existing from its own side. So it says, it starts with the first category of phenomena called the 5 aggregates. And the first of those 5 aggregates, which is just a way of Buddha dividing up the components of a person into 5 parts as opposed to 2, into 5. And the first one says form. And that just refers to the physical. So it says in the sutra, form is emptiness. Emptiness is form. Form is not other than emptiness. And emptiness is not other than form. Well, technically that's not quite right, but what it means, as His Holiness says, it's guaranteeing that we don't become nihilistic and chuck the baby out with the bathwater. So all it's saying is this: there has to be first established conventionally a cup. You establish cup, merely, cup, define it, fulfill the definition, tick the box, that's a cup. Okay, we don't get that right. We already have misconceptions, but we have to establish a convention called cup, a convention called form, and then we say that that cup that does exist, as Lama Zopa says, lacks a characteristic called inherent cup. So as Lama Zopa says, again, this is another way of saying the same thing as the Heart Sutra, the delusions decorate on what does exist conventionally, phenomena that don't exist there. So you can never have nothingness. Another way to put this is Lama Tsongkhapa's 2 truths, the conventional and the ultimate. As soon as we hear there is no cup from its own side, just instinctively we become nihilistic and chuck the baby out with the bathwater. Oh, well, there's no cup. And Buddhists do this all the time. Well, everything's empty anyway, it doesn't matter, we say. That's complete wrong view, total mistake, completely wrong. We fall into the abyss, as Lama Tsongkhapa says. So what we have to do is, every time we hear that there is nothing from the side of the cup that makes it a cup, the cup is empty of existing inherently as a cup. Instead of going towards the wrong view that says there's no cup, we have to bring ourselves into the middle way, which is here between the 2 truths, and say to ourselves, ha, Robina, there being no cup from its own side means there is a cup that does exist in dependence upon the mind calling it that. And every time we hear, oh, there is a cup that does exist in dependence upon this and that, and then we get all kind of relieved, and we go, oh, thank God there is something after all, we grasp at it. That's the wrong view that sees it as eternalistic. That's the reification process, and that's going too far the other way. So this over-exaggerates things, and this one under-exaggerates. So the middle way is there where we see these 2 meaning the same thing. So we have to practice. Every time we hear emptiness, we have to go, that means it's dependent arising. And every time we hear dependent arising, we have to say, that means it's empty. And when these 2 come together closer and closer, not further away and further away, which is how we live our mad lives now, like maniacs, up and down like yo-yos. The middle way, I like to think, is a bit like Harry Potter's platform 9 3/4. I heard about it. I didn't read, I heard about it. That's very nice. So, as soon as we hear there's something that does exist, we get all overexcited, we cling. So we start to looking for the emptiness, and we try to find 9 3/4, we go too far, and we go to nihilism, there's nothing there. Then we try to go back here to find 9 3/4, we just can't find between 9 and 10, The middle way is like invisible to us. So the middle way is the coming together of these 2, where that which is empty is that which is dependent arising, and that which is dependent arising is that which is empty. And finally, when you're finally a Buddha, the true non-dualism is when these 2 come together, and there's no longer subject-object, no longer separate. Emptiness and dependent arising are cognized simultaneously, and that's finally when you're a Buddha. The real middle way is this one. These 2 coming together. And Tsongkhapa teaches this, so tasty. You can never become nihilistic when you have these 2 together. The heart center expresses this. As Lama Yeshe says. And when we finally realize the emptiness of the cup, the emptiness of the self, whatever, he says, it is as if there is no I, but there is. But what does exist is so subtle, it is as if it does not exist. It is as if it is an illusion. And this is where the two truths come together so tasty. So as long as when we hear empty, we don't fall to nihilism, the feeling of nothingness, which is dreadful. And then every time we hear emptiness, even though it's counterintuitive, we say to ourselves, that means it's a dependent arising. And every time we hear dependent arising and refrain from clinging and over-reifying, we say that means it's empty. That'll get us quickly to the middle way. It's very skillful. This is Lama Tsongkhapa's way. And of course, all of this stuff, got to know the words, got to know the words, the definitions. Otherwise, it's meaningless. This is the point too. This is the point. This is why we talk about the two types of meditation. Okay, as for the Buddha's teachings, there are two kinds of meditation. Millions of techniques, but two main ways, two main modes of meditating. The first one is the concentration technique that these amazing Indians came up with. This genius technique that enables you to access much more subtle, more refined levels of your mind that the materialist models don't even posit as existing, that are necessarily beyond the gross conceptual. Incredibly refined, like laser, like sort of like the microscope of your mind. That concentration is necessary. And now, though, you use that in the second mode of meditation. So the goal here, and each of these is called in terms of their result. So single point of concentration is called calm abiding. It's the term they use. The end result of this subtle state of concentration, beyond the gross conceptual. And then the second meditation, which is the crucial one. This is called special insight, vipassana. Well, there are many kinds of vipassanas, and the one that's often known in the world as vipassana is one of Lord Buddha's techniques to help us start using the experiences of the body, you know. That's just one, and that's the one that's known in the world. But this one's special insight is insight into emptiness. And the methodology here, nothing to do with the body. On the basis of concentration, which you achieve in the first mode, you utilize this laser-like refined microscope of your mind to now go to the second mode to get insight into how things exist. But the method you use is kind of interesting. The method you use, as they say in the Tibetan tradition, it's called analytical meditation. Now, that completely throws us. First we have these weird concepts of what meditation is, and then we hear analytical and kind of like squeezes our brains, you know. So we have to look at this word meditate. And Tibetan word meditate is the verb gom, which means to familiarize. It's shocking to us. What does this mean, you know? Completely throws us hearing that word. Meditate, to meditate is the verb to familiarize. We've got to really look at what we mean by meditation then. So to familiarize, what it means is this. What Buddha's saying is this. What we have to do is familiarize our mind with precisely two things. That which is true and that which is virtuous. So both of these come together. That's what Buddha's meaning by meditation. So the first mode is concentration, where you consciously don't involve in conceptuality because you need to get focused. But that level of focus is like this super subtle, super capable, super amazing, genius level of mind that doesn't just sit there spacing out. The greatest meditators, having done their 30 years of study and analysis and debate and thinking, have all the teachings under their belt, then are able to go to the second mode and use all the teachings they've learned about dependent arising, for example, here just in relation to emptiness. And what you do is you then do an analytical meditation. Well, what does that mean? Well, I'm sorry to disappoint you. A simpler, this is arcane Gelugpa 14th century term. What we would say in our modern language, analytical meditation is simply meaning to think about it. I'm sorry to disappoint you. That's the meditation you're using here. But because you've got a subtle, focused mind, way more capable than we can imagine, genius level of mind, super focused, super clear. It can use all the teachings it's known, that you've studied for years about dependent arising and all the other logical arguments you use to prove emptiness, and you use logic. You think at a subtle level, at a very refined way, super focused, using remarkable logic to argue with ego-grasping's misconception. It's like super refined, super subtle analysis at the deepest level of your mind. That's the method you use. And then what happens, that thinking through something triggers the insight into emptiness. So in other words, what you think about is dependent arising. And that triggers the insight into emptiness. Are we communicating here? You can't realize emptiness without knowing the words. You can't realize emptiness without knowing dependent arising, for example, which means you've got to study all the teachings and look at all the logical analyses and get them really clear, because what Buddha's saying is, like we've been saying, all these neurotic emotions are all concepts. In their bare bones, they are elaborate, lying misconceptions, fantasies that we've made up and believed in for eons. So we have to use super intelligence and super focus to unpack their lies, to argue with them, to deconstruct them. It's really intense, hard work. Just like learning anything. You've got to learn the theory first, and then you make the cake. You learn the theory first, then you play the piano. Like everything, you start with a theory, and then you internalize it in the second mode of meditation, where you get insight into the cake, where you get insight into the music, because you practice and practice and practice those theories. Same here. We can't escape using the conceptual mind. It's the stepping stone to clarity. It's the stepping stone to wisdom, you know. There's many meditations we can do. As we know, there's Dzogchen and Mahamudra, these wonderful high techniques where you don't use conceptuality. But there's an assumption there that you've done masses of work already. And you can simply meditate, focusing on the nature of your mind. Different kinds of meditations, all part of the marvelous toolkit that we need to use, you know. But the classic approach of combining these two modes of meditation is another way of describing using dependent arising and emptiness. Dependent arising is you know, first you get your single point of concentration, then you learn the words to the logical arguments about dependent arising, and then in your focusing meditation, in your special insight meditation, you utilize that refined mind to do analysis, but at a very subtle level. Don't underestimate analysis, believe me. They talk about it, we can analyze at the subtlest level, so refined analysis. Undisturbed, subtle, super logical analysis. We need to get to that level. And that's what does the thinking and breaking down and using the logic to argue with ego's misconceptions. And that's what triggers the insight. So in your meditation, you hold that insight. You hold it. It might last a second. When it ceases, you go back to the analysis. And then you get another insight. You hold it longer until eventually you hold your insight non-conceptually. And one day, you will have your first non-conceptual direct insight into that emptiness. And from that second, you stop becoming an ordinary being and you become known as a superior being. And from that second, you can no longer go back down into samsara. You can only move forward to Buddhahood. That moment is this paradigm shift of your first non-conceptual insight into emptiness. Finally, when the penny drops, that there is no independent, inherent I from its own side. That's when we have that insight. And then we can perfect that until we eventually become a Buddha. All of this is what we have to do to get these realizations. And this is all the methodology laid out by our lamas, who got it back from theirs, who got it back from the Nalanda tradition in the 7th century, who tracked it back to the great yogis, who track it back to the Buddha. One step at a time. Any questions, people? Who's that? Go, give. Other way. Hang on. Whoever. Go.
Hi. How do we know that emptiness itself is not a delusion?
Okay, how do you know anything is not a delusion? What would you have to do? Let's say somebody tells you 1 + 1 is 2. What would you do? What would you do to prove it's true or not? What would you do?
Check it up.
What would you do?
I mean, I would investigate it.
And what would you have to do to investigate it? Speaking to the mic, darling. What was the process you'd go through?
Analysis.
No, but simple. Keep it simple. You've got to hear the facts. Somebody says to you 1 + 1 is 2. So that means you've got to know the meaning of those words first, don't you? You've got to know what 1 means. Do you agree?
Yes.
You've got to know what plus means. You've got to know what equals means. And you've got to know what 2 means. You've got your definitions clear first. Would you agree with that? And then you'd go home, like your teacher would say, and you'd do your homework, wouldn't you? And you'd get your blocks or you'd write out something. But you have to take these as basic facts of what you're trying to work. You've got to take them as a given, that 1 is 1 and 2 and 3 and equals and plus. You've got to have the definitions of these right. Would you agree? Would you agree?
Yeah.
And then you have to work it out, wouldn't you? And you'll either find that it's true or not, but not true in an absolute sense, true in a relative sense in relation to that model. Is that true or not? Is that true? Is that how you'd work it out?
Yes.
Let's say someone tells you you're playing piano and you're playing Bach, and you say to yourself, how do I know that I'm playing the right note? What would you do to prove it you're playing the right note? What's the right note mean? What would you do?
I don't know.
Oh, come on, to be ridiculous. Of course you know. If you're learning music and you've got Bach on your piano there and you're playing a note and you go, how do I know if I played the right note? What would you do to prove that you played the right note? Sweetheart, I'm not trying to be complicated. No, that's meaningless. You play anything. How do you know it's the right note? What would you do to prove it's the right note? You can't hear me, can you? I think you can. You're just too scared to talk.
No, I'm just thinking.
But you don't have to think. It's not complicated. Okay. So someone says to you anything. Someone says put 2 eggs in and flour and milk and you'll get a cake. They're words, aren't they? They're instructions, aren't they? How will you prove it's true? What will you do? What will you do to prove it's true? Sweetheart, I don't believe you're not answering me.
Yeah, I mean, I would test it.
What would mean test mean? What would you do? Simple, keep it really ordinary English. What would you do with that recipe?
I would try to make it.
Thank you. And then what would you do at the end? You'd either prove it's right or it's not, wouldn't you?
Yes.
Would you not?
Yes.
Then you can agree that it's the correct recipe. Is that right?
Yes.
So let's say someone says 1 + 1 is 2. You go home and you work it out and you prove it's true or not. Let's say you're playing music and you've got some theories there, because I'm talking here a bunch of theories, they're called mathematics. Then I'm talking about a bunch of theories called cooking. Then I'm talking about another bunch of theories called music. And now we're here talking about another bunch of theories about how things exist. So first we're talking about a bunch of theories. Do you accept my point?
Yes.
So then those theories are just theories. Anybody could say anything they like, couldn't they?
Right, exactly.
But don't just believe it, darling. You take the theories, and those theories, first of all, have to be coherent within their own system. Would you agree with that? Would you agree with that?
Yes. So basically, I mean, I've been trying to test out these theories, and I feel like
Which ones are you talking about?
So when I think about emptiness...
Excuse me, but do you realize it's a highly advanced realization?
Yes.
Okay, so what's the first level you have to prove 1 + 1 is 2 at? What's the first level you have to prove it at? What's the first level you have to know something at before you get to the experience? It's called theory.
Yes, the theory, okay.
Okay, let's say you've never heard of acupuncture, and you hear about it. And then you go, well, that's interesting, and then you keep hearing, and you think you might engage in a course in acupuncture because you've got some confidence that could be something there. So you'd have to learn the theories first, wouldn't you?
Yes.
Would you agree with that?
Yeah.
Wouldn't you accept, though, that if it's a valid, this is a crucial point I'm saying, would you agree that well before you start sticking needles in people, you're going to have to be quite confident that those theories are coherent? Would you agree with that?
Yes.
That the theories are coherent?
Right.
The theories, not to mention practice yet.
Yeah.
You could even give someone an instruction of how to put a needle in, even without having done it, because you've got the theories down. It's the same with mathematics. It's the same with musical theory. It's the same with cooking theory. It's the same with these theories. You've got to first prove them conceptually.
Yeah, but I think that's exactly that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying
What do you mean trying to do?
I'm trying to understand the theories.
Excuse me, then fine, keep doing it until you can understand them. Just be patient with yourself. What are you rushing ahead for? Are you studying with proper people? Do you know that they're valid sources, what you're studying?
Well, it's all a process, right? So
No, excuse me, bugger process. Are you studying with people who know about emptiness? If you're studying with music, a person who doesn't know music, you're in big trouble, babe. If you're just reading vague recipe books, you're going to be in trouble. You need a proper person who knows what they're talking about to tell you how to play Bach, to show you how to make a cake, to show you how to do mathematics, to show you how to understand emptiness. You've got to have a proper person who knows what the hell they're talking about, and you've got to have confidence, and then you start studying those theories and learning them and using them and thinking about them and practicing and following all the instructions until you're confident that theoretically it is valid, and from this will come the experience. It's one step at a time, baby. It needs a lot of work. Are we communicating here?
yeah, no, I'm completely.
So then where's
with
your problem then?
Because as I'm going through this process,
What
we don't
process
need
are
to
you
go into
going
it.
through?
Well, of
What do you mean
testing
by
out
that?
of testing out these ideas.
What do you mean by testing out these ideas? What do you mean
Well,
by
so
that?
taking, for example, what you're saying or what other people say and trying to think about it.
No, you're not doing
understand the
enough, I would
theories.
suggest. It's just like you hear a bit of music here, a bit of music there, a bit of cooking there, and I try to think about it. It's not nearly enough. You've got to engage 100%. You can't play Bach by being vague about the music, try a bit of this and a bit of that. That's not enough, darling. Can you not hear the point I'm making? It's an intensive, ongoing, thorough, total immersion process that goes one step at a time according to proper theories and proper teachers. It's not just vague notions. You'll never become a pianist
So
if
is
you do
asking
that.
these
What?
kinds of questions not
Asking what?
not-
Who's asking questions here? I'm not talking about questions.
Well, the
Direct
questions
questions.
that I'm asking you, for example, are they not part of this process?
What
of-
questions?
Well,
You
the
haven't asked
question
me a
I had
question
about
yet.
emptiness just now.
What? You haven't asked me a single question yet.
I asked you if how do we know if emptiness itself
Yeah,
is not a
precisely.
delusion?
I'm just giving you the method of how to answer it. Can you not hear that? You haven't heard it. My answer didn't help you. Back to square one.
Okay, I think I have to think about it.
No, you keep her the microphone. Okay. Can you not hear the principle I'm making? The principle, the point. If I were talking recipes here, you're saying to me, how do I know that recipe works? That's what you're asking, isn't it? Is that what you're asking? How do I know that recipe is valid? Is that what you're asking me? You're saying, how do you know that emptiness is not a delusion? That's what you're asking, isn't it?
Yeah, because...
Okay, stop right there.
All right.
Stop. So then instead of saying that, you say to me, how do I know that 1 + 1 is 2 is not a delusion? That's what you're asking me, isn't it?
Yeah, you could
So
say...
what would you do to prove it? Is back to my first point. What would you do to prove it's theoretically true? Forget experience. What would you have to do to prove it yourself that it's theoretically true? What would you have to do?
I'd have to understand the theory in the first place.
Thank you. It means you have to study mathematics. Would you agree with that?
Yeah.
Same here. So I'm just asking you out of interest, are you studying Buddhist philosophical teachings? Just reading a book every now and again?
I mean, I think I am.
What do you mean you think you are?
I mean, I think, like, for example, coming to this teaching is part of trying to...
No, that's not enough. You're just hearing a few ideas. You've got to be, to realize emptiness, you've got to be immersed in a thorough course laid out by all the people since the Buddha who've shown how to realize emptiness, because this is the end result of a long process of much, much inner work. It's only, but first you have to learn the theories. Then you can prove or not theoretically whether emptiness is valid. It has to first be theoretically coherent, just like acupuncture. So one step at a time, but not just by reading a few books and coming to occasional classes. That will not help you.
Okay, so then what do I have to do?
I just told you. Several
No,
times.
I mean, besides reading books or going to teachings.
How would you learn to become a pianist like Bach?
I mean, do I have to become a nun? I mean...
How would you learn to become a pianist like Bach? How would you do it? What would you have to do?
I mean, I would study, practice.
Thoroughly, 100%. It takes 30 years to play like Bach. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah.
If you want to just think about music every now and again, if you want to just appreciate Bach and play a few scales, that's okay. But if you do want to realize emptiness, because it's the only, first theoretically, because your question is, how do you know it's not a delusion? I'm giving you the answer. The only way you'll know is by studying it. There's no other way for you to know whether or not it's a delusion. The only way you can do it is immerse yourself in all the practices and teachings that will lead you there. First to theoretical certainty and then to experiential. Then you can prove yourself whether or not it is a delusion, because it might well be. You're absolutely right. But like the guy this morning, Dan, how do you know? Basically, we're asking, how do we know who to believe? Nobody. Check yourself. You're the boss. But go by the masters. Go by the ones who've done it already and follow them. Are we communicating?
Yeah.
Good. Thank you, darling.
Thank you.
Any questions here? Yes.
Hi, so good to see you. So I have a question. I'm taking one of those courses. I am taking the Lam Rim course out of the London.
Yes, fantastic, yes.
So right now we're on this very section, and I'm having a tremendous amount of difficulty, the shamatha and insight. So they talk about, you know, being calm enough to have shamatha, yet you've got the object in mind, and then, you know, later you would develop insight. I can't even hold the object, and I don't.
So then, what does that mean? You have to just keep trying, isn't it?
I was wondering if you had some suggestions.
No, just follow the instructions.
I'm not doing a good job.
Why do you assume you're not doing a good job?
Because I can't hold the object.
Why do you assume you should be able to hold the object? Why do you assume it's that easy? Where's the assumption? Why are you believing in your assumption that by now you should have been able to hold the object? Where is it written that by now, after a little bit of study, you should be able to hold the object? That's your mistake, not the fact that you can't hold the object. You just got some expectations that are fantasy. Honey, the well-qualified people study for years and years and then go off and meditate for another 30. In theory, you can get samatha in a year and a half. 6 months even, if you're really qualified. But most people are nowhere near qualified, baby. And the only way to get it is to give up sex, drugs and rock and roll, become a nun or a monk, do masses of purification, masses of practice, go to the mountains, and then you might get concentration. Then you'll hold the object. So please, darling, don't have over-exaggerated expectations of yourself.
Thank you.
Good. I'm happy. Rejoice in your progress.
Thank you, Venerable Robina. My question is, you had started to talk about a 4-step process for deconstructing emptiness, or arriving at emptiness. And I've got the first one, identify the object to be negated.
That's right.
And
then?
What are the other 3?
The next one is to establish the parameters of where this I would exist if it existed. And the two, and there the options are 2. If there is an I that does exist independently, let's say the first level of the parts, it has to either be, in general, no. If there is an I in there somewhere, because it can't be in the chair, we have to deduce the parameters, and that's here. Would you agree it's here? If there is an I that's independent, it either has to be completely separate from the parts, or it has to be completely oneness with the parts. They're the only 2 options, if there is a self. And the third one is to negate the first argument, and the fourth one is to negate the second one. They're the 4 points.
Thank you.
Okay. Someone here. Okay. Go. Yes.
Hello.
Hello.
I have a question regarding the karma and the mental illness.
Yes.
I don't understand how, if you can have a motivation and a good intention, and you do bad actions because that doesn't connect to your mind because of your mental illness, is it creating bad karma?
I understand.
That's my first question. And then, how do you get out of the karma when you have a mental illness?
I understand. Well, so you mean by mental illness the way we use the word in our culture, don't you? Okay. Well, I want to say this first, and I'm not trying to be sarcastic or funny, but I use this term sometimes, and the way, like we're talking about the Buddha's view of these unhappy states of mind we've all got, right? Well, one of the terms, which is a bit medieval for these different states of mind, one of the terms used to refer to them is mental affliction. You understand? Mental affliction. I think that's not a word we use in our daily life, affliction. But if you look up the dictionary, another word for it is illness. So mental illness actually would be a valid term that Buddha would use to refer to anger, jealousy, depression, low self-esteem, attachment. Are you with me? So the materialist model of the mind would say when you got bucket loads of anger, where you're at the point of paranoid, you understand, that's what we call mental illness. Buddha just says we're all mentally ill. It's a question of degree. Can you hear that point first? And that's a serious point. So then given that, you could say you don't have to be seriously mentally ill to not be paying attention to what you're doing. Most of us who would consider ourselves normal are creating negative karma all the time, but we're not aware of it. So you don't need to be seriously mentally ill to do that. And the Buddha's view about karma is it's a natural law. So in other words, if a person doesn't know that fire burns, it doesn't stop the fire from burning you, does it? And because karma is not a reward and punishment model, which is how we think of, good and bad, like sin and God punishing and rewarding, it's not a question of that. Buddha says karma is a natural law. So if a person out of complete ignorance doesn't realize that they're angry and doesn't realize that killing the mouse out of anger will leave a seed in their mind that will ripen in the future as their own suffering, and most people wouldn't accept that view, but this is Buddha's, and he says this is a natural law. Not knowing about it doesn't stop it happening. You see my point?
So it is a negative karma that you get even if you don't know it?
That's what I'm saying.
Yes.
Most sentient beings, would you agree that most sentient beings on this earth, most humans kill something, would you agree?
Yes.
Kill mosquitoes, kill the roaches, kill the rats. Now we're taught as Christians that God made these creatures for our benefit. And then scientists tell us they don't have brains and they don't suffer. So the view of most people, religious and scientific, is that it's okay to kill cockroaches, rats, mice, etc. You see my point? Now the Buddha's view would be it's not so cool, because if we look at the motivation behind killing the rat, it's called anger. Would you agree? It's called anger. And he says anything done with anger can only leave a negative seed in your mind that can only ripen as your future suffering. So my point is, ordinary people, without knowing what we're doing, are creating negative karma. And indeed sometimes good as well. That's why we have to be in charge of the process and know what is negative, know what is positive. If we choose to take Buddha's view, no one says we have to. This is just Buddha's view, you understand? Do you see what I'm saying?
Yes.
So this is the reason to have most compassion for most people is, as Lama Zopa says, most people on this earth have no idea that what goes on in their mind plays any role at all in their lives. Do you understand my point? Yes. So it's quite a profound point that Buddha's making, which is why he suggests we have to be in charge of the process. Every single thought counts. Do you see what I'm saying? Are we communicating?
Yes.
All right, Donna.
Thank you.
Good. Yeah. Yes, Sveta.
Hi. In a lot of these Buddhist prayers and
Can't quite hear, darling.
During the meditation and the prayers, when we refer to as I or me,
yes.
So in the background of emptiness, are we referring that to our mind and subconscious? Or are we referring that to
what?
Referring to our mind or...
No. Okay, the simple way of putting what we're saying with emptiness is ultimately there is no inherent I, but conventionally there is an I. But as Lama Zopa says, what does exist is so subtle, it's as if there's no I, but there is one. So it's the key is once we've realized emptiness, then we really will understand what it means that there is a dependent arising I that's extremely subtle. So there still is a valid statement I, but we embellish it, we distort it, we exaggerate it. That's why again I keep saying, as Lama Zopa says, when we realize the emptiness of the I, it's as if there's no I, but there is an I. But what does exist is so subtle, it's as if there's no I. And this is a very powerful way of describing, understanding when we've got it, of unifying emptiness and dependent arising. So on the conventional level, there is a Sveta. But we have to understand how exactly she does exist. And that's the hardest part. So we use the term I, it's a fact. The conventional reality is we talk about I, cushions, floor, carpets, ceilings, lights, they're all the same. Ultimately, there is no light, no ceiling, no pillar, no cup, no carpet. But conventionally there is, but it's so subtle. And that's the key, putting these two together, understanding them properly. Are we communicating?
Yes. And I had a second question. How do we explain what is it called as acts of God The natural
obviously,
catastrophes.
what is an act of God? Give me an example.
Like an earthquake or a storm, for
karma.
that matter.
The first way our karma ripens is the type of rebirth we get. So in our case, we must have practiced enormous amount of morality karma to get a human birth. Okay? I always remember, makes me laugh this, I remember one book published that's called The Tibetan Art of Parenting. It's like a baby book. And some Tibetan mummies were interviewed how they prepare to get pregnant. It's a very fascinating book. And in that, one Lama was quoted as saying that at the time of a male and female human being having sex, billions of consciousnesses that have recently passed away, and obviously it can't just be humans because there aren't that many, billions of consciousnesses that have recently passed away are desperately trying to get in, you know? So we made it, we got in. I mean, this is miraculous. That means our virtue must have been so strong, our mind found one of those human wombs. So that's the first way our karma ripens. In our case, we got a human birth. Now, the next three ways that our karma ripens are in this life. The first one, the next one, as I said, is all your experiences, which is basically how people in this world treat you. The rats, the roaches, the humans, the dogs, the giraffe, whatever. Whatever sentient beings you meet, whether they're nice to you or mean to you, essentially, that's called experiences similar to the cause. However people see you or treat you, you must have done something like that to them, because karma pretty much is personal. That's called experiences similar to the cause. The next one is called, they call it actions similar to the cause, which is referring to all your own mental tendencies, your characteristics, your personality traits, your love, your hate, your jealousy, your kindness, your compassion, whatever they might be. You're being good at football, good at music, whatever your tendencies are, this is the next way that your past actions ripen in the present. And the fourth one, and this is, we're getting to this, is called environmental karma. It's the way the physical, it's more, I would put it this way, experiences similar to the cause is kind of more personal. But environmental karma is more sort of less personal. So let's just say in relation to one action called killing. If killing had been triggered at the time of our past death, as opposed to our karma of conscious, intentional non-killing, probably, as Lama Zopa says, practice in the context of keeping vows of non-killing. But instead of that, let's say, if a killing karmic seed was triggered, then that would cause our mind to run to the lion's womb or the dog's womb or a hell birth or a spirit birth. That would be a lower realm rebirth. The second way karma ripens, and in our case killing could be this way, the experience similar to the cause of killing is you die young or you get killed. Well, look at this human planet. I mean, so many humans die 1 month old, 2 years old, 17 years old, as we say, for no medical reason. Or you get killed, or you die young. I mean, look at fetuses. I would suggest, no one does this survey, we can't do a survey, market research, probably more fetuses who are beings who got a human birth, who won the lottery at the time of their past death, a virtuous karmic seed was triggered, they got a human birth, a human mummy's womb, but then they died before they even got born. Isn't it? That's called the experience similar to the cause of that sentient being's past killing. You die young or you get killed. The fourth one is environmental karma. And that's the way the very physical world impacts upon you. So then, you know, one of the ways that killing can ripen from the past as an environmental result is you've got ill health. And food harms you. You're allergic to peanuts. You're allergic to the water, you know. Do you understand? So then all an act of God would be a collective result for many people as a result of their past negative actions, like an earthquake, you know, something like that when the whole earth collapses under us, like it did in Kathmandu recently. That's the collective karma of all the people who suffered as a result of that from a negative action that manifests environmentally as opposed to personally. Do you understand? Do you understand? So interestingly, I always like to quote this one about killing, like, you know, how we all think that eating good food is the cause of health. Well, I remember reading about Warren Buffett, this mega rich fellow, you know, I read his biography, and he gave all his $55 billion to Bill Gates, you know, that bloke. He's famous for being a businessman, and he's famous for being kind of humble. He drives his same old Toyota, lives in the same old house for 50 years, but also he's very conservative in his habits. And he's like 85 right now, and he's fit as a fiddle, but his daughter said, I've never seen water pass his lips. His diet since he's a child is cheeseburgers, Coca-Cola, and vanilla ice cream. That should blow the scientists' minds. It proves food is not the main cause of health. In Buddha's view, he's lived long and food nourishes him because of his really powerful non-killing karma in the past. And so he's got the environmental result of the experience similar to the cause of a long life, and the environmental result of healthy body and food nourishes him. Do you understand? Okay.
Thank
Somebody
you.
Else? Yeah, okay. What else? Yes, Jane. 10 to 5. No time to go.
Hello.
Who?
I'm struggling with
I can't see you, Petal.
Hi, Dr. Venerable Robina. I'm struggling with the concept of understanding the mind stream and how that's different or related to the self.
Okay, good. So where's the confusion, darling?
So the mind stream is, it's like a moment to moment to moment, but the self isn't. How should I look at the self? It's not. Yeah, it's not really.
I understand. Okay. I understand. Okay, conventionally, we've agreed, haven't we, that you are the type of phenomenon called a person or a self or an I. Would you agree? Remember those words are synonymous?
Yes.
What's your name?
Sam.
Sam is a name given to a phenomenon called a self. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
This is used in a conventional sense. You're not a chair, you're not a cushion, right? You're a self, aren't you? A person. They're synonymous. Okay, so conventionally we can say then that, so what are the two main components of a person? We talked before. What are the two main components?
Mind and body.
Good. Consciousness or mind are the same, remember?
Yes, yes.
So then consciousness is one part of yourself. Would you agree?
Yes.
Well, then how could your consciousness be the self? Could you just agree that your self has got two parts, including a body? So how can it be just the consciousness?
It's not.
No. So therefore your question is?
So when you pass away...
Okay, okay, even you could argue that your self continues as well. You see, this is where the tricky part is for us. When we hear the word self, we hear it in a concrete way. But in one sense, as Lama Zopa says, we've got the wrong self and the right self. So there is, as I repeat this one all the time, as Rinpoche said, when Sam has realized the emptiness of his own self, meaning the emptiness of an inherent fantasy, over-exaggerated, distorted, ridiculous, non-existent self, which Sam doesn't realize when he says self, that's the one he's meaning, but there is still a reality of a self that is so subtle, and they tend to refer to that as the mere self, the mere I. It's just a very light term given to what will reincarnate, because what reincarnates is Sam, what we label now the consciousness of Sam, and it's linked with its own set of the four elements. So at the time of death, when you get to the very subtle level of Sam's mind, that's called the clear light consciousness, and it's linked to the very subtle wind energy, which is the basis of the physical. So the second it leaves Sam's body, Sam as we know it is finished. All there is left is all the billions of karmic seeds on that consciousness that won't go astray, created by Sam and lugged around from past lives of all the seeds you planted. That very subtle consciousness and the very subtle wind will then find its way to a new mummy's body. So you could say the mere I, which is the name we give to the basis of that body and that mind, it still exists conventionally, that will continue and take a new rebirth, and now that new self will be called Fred or Mary or dog or lion or whatever, you know. It's learning to use the words conventionally and ultimately, and to see the distinction between them. And that just takes time by studying it all. You understand?
Yes, yes.
You with me?
I got it.
Right,
Thank you.
Good.
Very helpful.
Okay, good. Because we talk about a mind stream, but that's really ridiculous. There's no such thing as a mind stream. I mean, the only moment of mind that exists is this moment. The millisecond of the past does not exist. We tend to think of a mind stream that goes back to beginningless time, which is how Buddha says, but he's not saying there is a mind that does exist in the past. There's no such thing. But all he's getting at is we can't point to a place when it began. And also we can't point to the future mind until it's there. So there's only really this moment of mind at any given moment, isn't there? The point that Buddha's making is it's got a connection with what you did yesterday and the day before and the life before. And that whatever you are at this moment is coming from the imprints that were put into the mind before. Are you listening to him? With me? Yes. All right. Jane had a question. Yes, Jane.
Hi. Back to the mouse.
Yes.
Did I understand you to say that a person who sees a mouse, let's say the mouse is ill in their kitchen, and the person thinks, oh, this poor mouse, I'm going to put it out of its misery and kill it.
You mean having compassion?
With compassion.
Yeah.
So the motivation is compassion
That's right.
to free the mouse from suffering. Did I understand correctly that you said that was not the creation of negative karma?
Yep.
See, I disagree.
Geshe Sopa even said in the Lamrim, he says, even when you're forced to kill, intentionally you're forced to kill that person, and you don't want to, you can't say you create the same. It's like there has to be something there. There's always something there. But that you don't even create you can't create the negative karma of killing, because it's got to have all those pieces in place. That's what the dependent arising action called an action of killing is. It's made up of its components. You change one component.
Yeah, but you still see. Which
piece causes the negative to be? Maybe
But I would argue. Of course, it's not as bad as, oh my God, there's a mouse. I hate mice. I'm going to kill it. But the fact is you're still killing. You still have the object.
Yes,
you still have the thought.
Right.
I'm going to kill it.
That's right.
You do kill it, and then
right.
you say, it's dead. Maybe you don't rejoice. You think, oh, good. Now it's not suffering.
Right.
But to me, that's still an act of killing. So in my mind, I think that's still negative.
That's the Hinayana view. The Mahayana,
I guess I'm a Hinayanist.
No, it's true. It's not wrong. There is, even if you that's exactly what Lama Zopa says. That's the traditional one. That's why at the first level of practice there's no wiggle room. You just don't kill. But the definition of what the main piece that makes it negative, and that's why when we use in the Mahayana, when we change our motivation. Your motivation is what transforms it. That's why the example of the captain who killed the people, the person,
right.
The Hinayanas would say there's some negativity still.
Yeah.
But Lama Zopa says not only in the Mahayana is there no negativity, it enhanced his enlightenment.
Oh, really?
Yes.
I recall
Lama Zopa
Rinpoche saying something different, but
maybe
you're probably right.
But I'm not saying I'm right. But in Daughter Satisfaction, when I had to edit it, that's what he said.
Oh, okay.
And that's the point of the Mahayana about the motivation. That's how come, before we shove the food down the throat, you start offering and seeing it as empty. You can't conceive of the virtue that we create before we shove the food in, Sure, there's some negativity there with the attachment, but the amount of virtue we create, and that's just the motivation. And that's how come that's the saving grace in the Mahayana. We're going to continue to do idiot things. And if we do, that's why, if they just take the Hinayana level first, there's no way out. There's no wiggle room. You've got to give up sex, drugs, and rock and roll. You've got to live in fullness of vows, up in the mountains, and practically ground to a halt, because there's no way out except by giving up the actions. Which is why we can say they virtually posit that you give up everything when you finish, because karma's negative in its nature. That's why the Mahayana one is such a different view.
Yeah, so you're saying, along these lines, then all the people who think, oh, my dog is dying, my dog is can't walk anymore, or has cancer or whatever, I'm going to bring my dog to the vet and have the vet, quote unquote, put the dog
really
down.
Is compassion,
you're saying that's not negative karma, that's not killing?
No, because most people it's mixed with a grotesque, self-centered attachment, pretending to be compassion. Because there's so much fear and can't stand the thought of a dog suffering.
So it's only pure compassion that would negate the negative action, it being a negative action.
There has to be negativity if there's attachment as well. There has to be. So, but the general point here is that this is the Mahayana interpretation. The motivation is the key factor. And this is also proving emptiness. Where's bad killing? Where's negative action? What makes it negative? That's what we have to analyze. Which component makes it negative?
Well, I would say taking the life of another.
No, that's not an action. That's not an action.
How is that not an action?
It is. The life dies, but it's not necessarily the motivation is what makes it negative or positive. Intention itself is I will kill. That's got no character to it. There's no. Okay.
If I kill you, Robina, God forbid, okay, and I somehow have some kind of virtuous something, you're saying that's not negative, that I'm actually, I'm ending your life.
Okay, yes, you're right, but it doesn't make it negative, no. Compassion, as Lama Zopa...
Then why is killing one of the 10 non-virtuous actions?
Because we're talking first level. It is a negative action. It is a negative action because it harms another. Buddha says don't do it because it'll harm you. But the reason it harms you is because you do it out of anger.
But it's negative because I'm okay, it's negative because, why is it negative?
There you go. That's the question to ask yourself.
Yeah.
Analyze which of these dependent arising components makes it negative. That's the question. Right. Leave it there. That's the one. I'm saying motivation. Check it.
See, I wanted to I would add that it's not just motivation, it's also the fact that I'm robbing the other.
No, that's all emotional crap. Excuse me.
Well, I'm ending someone. If I end someone else's life, that's negative.
No, it's not. It's not comfortable for the person, but it's not the issue discussion here. It's not the discussion. It's not the discussion. We're analyzing the dependent arising of something, and this is all this is doing is proving emptiness. We're analyzing the dependent arising called killing a mouse, and we're looking at each of the components that make up that dependent arising, and then we have to locate the dependent arising piece that is what causes me. Negative action means a seed I leave on my mind. Negative in general.
Doesn't matter so it doesn't matter how it affects the other.
That's not the issue when it comes to this no, that's not the issue there. It's not the issue at all, no.
Oh.
That is an issue in other things, but not in analysing what makes it negative when I do it. That's the specific point I'm getting at here. But as Lama says,
but I would say that does contribute to what makes it negative.
Okay.
If I steal from you, I'm taking something from you. That's causing you suffering. That to me it contributes to why it's negative. If I give you $100,000 and that benefits you, that's part of why it's good.
One of the components of an action that makes it more negative, for example, stealing is a main break of a vow if you steal something of value to someone else. Yes, that's true. But this discussion here is if we look into the dependent arising that make the different components that make up an action, that leaves, meaning the seed. There are many factors, there's millions of factors actually that all play roles, because every single action is different. It's true. But in general, the Mahayana view, the view in general that what makes it a negative, and this is why Buddha says it'll cause me suffering, is because it's the delusion, the anger, the wish to harm. The wish to harm. As Lama says anyway, meaning well is not enough. We need wisdom. That's when it really is proper.
Okay, let me just say one more thing.
Enough.
No.
Enough.
Wait, I have one more thing. Wait. So I know someone who is a farmer, and one of these farmers, I honor the animals, etc., etc. One day he came in, he was a client of mine, and he said, I just killed 90 chickens.
That's delusion. That's not virtue, that's attachment. It's fantasy. That's called ignorance, thinking killing bulls and offering it to God. That's called ignorance. The motivation there is ignorance, even more stupid.
So how's that different from killing the mouse?
Because there's compassion in the heart. If there is compassion...
And he's saying there's compassion to the chickens.
He's not being compassionate. He's saying it's... No, never mind that. Jane, can we leave it?
All right. Thank you.
Okay. I mean, just back off and don't kill is the best thing. The point I'm trying to make is the power of motivation. But let's back off and not kill at all. Best, until we're a highly realized being. Then you have a vow to kill if it benefits them. Like the captain, So someone else.
Okay, don't know if...
Yes.
Is that on? Oh, it is on? Okay.
501.
All right, here I am.
Last question.
Animals. So speaking to you about...
No, don't speak to her, speak to me.
Okay, speak to you.
Ask me a question. Don't make a statement, ask me a question. I want a question or nothing. If there's no question, leave it.
No, maybe it's more of a... maybe
I don't want a statement. Okay. Questions. Thank you, goodbye. Okay, thank you, Precious. We go now. Okay, one more question.
Okay, who's having a question?
It's got to be a question.
I was wondering if you could talk about the difficulty in sometimes thinking that you're being compassionate, but actually you're indulging somebody else's attachment.
Are you coming tomorrow? Doesn't matter if you're not, but we'll do it tomorrow. Today's impossible. It's 5 o'clock. Time to go home.
Okay.
We'll do it tomorrow.
Okay.
Okay, people. Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you, thank you, thank you. So, given that 99.9% of what we've heard, including me, we've forgotten, but we can be very happy that everything we've heard has gone in. We've taken little photos of it and we've stored it away, so it's all there for us for our future. So we think all these seeds we've planted, this is a dedication, okay? All these seeds we've planted, we'd be so delighted And we're going to nourish these seeds from this moment forward, taking whatever tools we've got to develop our marvelous potential. Never, 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 please never give up on your potential, so that we can be of benefit to others, no matter how long it takes. Just thinking like this. And the prayer kind of expresses that. Gewadi Nyududag Lama Sange Drogyurne Drowachikyang Malupar Dei Salar Kupashok Jangchub Semchok Rinpoche Ma Kyepanam Kegyuchig Kyepanyam Pam Hepayang Gongne Gongdu Evashok. Okie dokie, thank you.